introspective, observant, somber, but steady. The smell of cedar is the first thing I always remember. It is not the smell of money or expensive cologne or the crisp paper of legal documents. It is the sharp, clean scent of fresh sawdust. It is the smell of creation. For 20 years, that smell was my oxygen. I closed my eyes, standing in the middle of the crowded cemetery, and tried to summon that scent. I tried to block out the drone of the priest's voice. He was a man who had never met my father, yet he was speaking about him with the confidence of an old friend. He spoke of Arthur Vance as a titan of industry, a pillar of the community, and a generous benefactor. He did not say a word about the birdhouses. He did not mention the hours Arthur spent sanding a single chair leg until it felt like silk against the skin. He did not mention how Arthur would stop the car to rescue a stray dog, or how he laughed so hard at his own bad jokes that his face turned red. To the world, Arthur was a checkbook. To me, he was the man who taught me that broken things could be mended if you just had the patience to understand how they were put together in the first place. I opened my eyes. The rain had started to fall, a cold grey drizzle that seemed appropriate for the day. It coated the black umbrellas that surrounded the gravesite like a flock of vultures waiting to descend. I stood at the back. I was not under the large heated tent reserved for the immediate family. That space was occupied. Evelyn stood there, my stepmother. She looked magnificent in her grief. It was a performance art. Her black dress was tailored to perfection, hugging her figure just enough to be tasteful, yet expensive enough to scream status. A lace veil covered her face, but I knew she was dry-eyed underneath it. She held a handkerchief to her cheek, dabbing at invisible tears whenever a photographer's flash went off. Next to her stood Mason, her son, my stepbrother. He looked bored. He was checking his watch, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His suit was new, likely bought with Arthur's credit card last week, while Arthur was lying in a hospital bed, taking his final breaths. Mason caught my eye across the sea of black coats. He smirked. A tiny, almost imperceptible lifting of the corner of his mouth, before turning back to whisper something to his mother. I looked down at my own hands. They were rough. The calluses on my palms were thick. There was a faint stain of walnut varnish under my fingernail that no amount of scrubbing could remove. These were working hands. They were Arthur's legacy to me. "Liam," a voice whispered beside me. It was Mrs. Higgins, the old housekeeper who had been with us since I was a boy. She was holding a small, battered umbrella. Her eyes were red and swollen. "You should be up there," she said, her voice trembling. "You should be in the front row. You're his son." I gave her a small, sad smile. "It's okay, Mrs. Higgins. I can hear him just fine from here." "It's not right," she muttered, gripping my arm. "He loved you more than life itself. Everyone knows that." "Everyone except the people who matter," I said softly. The service ended. The priest made the sign of the cross, and the heavy mahogany casket began to lower into the ground. A sudden panic seized my chest. It felt like a physical blow. He was going. He was really going. The anchor of my life, the only person who had ever looked at me and seen a son rather than a charity case, was disappearing into the earth. The crowd began to disperse. People lined up to offer condolences to Evelyn. I watched the procession. "So sorry for your loss, Evelyn. He was a great man. If you need anything regarding the estate, call me." Mason, you're the man of the house now. They shook Mason's hand firmly. They hugged Evelyn. They walked past me as if I were part of the landscaping. I was just Liam, the orphan Arthur took in, the hobby project, the boy who played with wood while the real family played with stocks. I waited until the crowd thinned. The limousines were starting to pull away, their tires crunching on the wet gravel. Evelyn and Mason were ushered into the lead car, a long black beast with tinted windows. Evelyn didn't look back. She didn't look for me. She assumed I would find my own way, as I always had. I walked toward the open grave. The workers were waiting respectfully at a distance with their shovels. I stood over the hole. The mahogany wood of the casket shone dully in the rain. It was a beautiful piece of work. Arthur would have criticized the joinery on the corners, though. He would have said they used too much glue and not enough skill. I reached into the pocket of my worn suit jacket. My fingers closed around a small, smooth object. It was a puzzle piece. 2 weeks ago, during one of his lucid moments, Arthur had asked me to bring him a block of maple wood to the hospital. He was too weak to lift a chisel, but he wanted to draw. He sketched a design for a complex Japanese puzzle box. "For the next chapter, Liam," he had wheezed, his voice rattling in his chest. "We build this one together. But there is a trick to it, a secret key." He had made me carve the first piece right there in the hospital room, carving the shavings into a trash can while the heart monitor beeped the rhythm of our time running out. I pulled the small wooden piece out. It was shaped like a dove's tail, intricate and unique. It was the key to a lock that didn't exist yet. I dropped it onto the casket. It made a soft thud as it hit the wood. "I'll finish it, Dad," I whispered. The word Dad felt heavy and precious on my tongue. Evelyn hated when I used it. She always corrected me, suggesting Arthur or Mr. Vance was more appropriate for my station. But here, in the rain, she couldn't correct me. "I promise, I'll keep the sawdust flying." I turned away. The rain was falling harder now. I walked past the rows of grey headstones to the parking lot. My truck was parked in the far corner, away from the luxury sedans. It was a beat-up Ford pickup, rusted around the wheel wells, the bed filled with tarps and tools. It was an honest vehicle. I climbed in and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with a familiar rattle. I patted the dashboard. "Let's go home," I said to the empty cab. But as I pulled out onto the main road, trailing far behind the funeral procession, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Home. I wasn't sure if that word applied anymore. The drive back to the Vance estate took 40 minutes. The house sat on a hill overlooking the city, a sprawling mansion of stone and glass that Arthur had bought 10 years ago to please Evelyn. He had hated it. He called it the museum. He said you couldn't put your feet up anywhere without scratching an antique. But he loved the grounds. Specifically, he loved the old carriage house at the back of the property. That was where we had built our sanctuary, the workshop. I parked my truck near the workshop, well away from the main entrance where the valets were parking the guests' cars. The reception was being held in the main hall, a catered affair. I sat in the truck for a moment, listening to the rain drumming on the metal roof. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since yesterday breakfast. Grief had a way of shrinking your stomach, but now the physical exhaustion was catching up. I checked my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My hair was wet and plastered to my forehead. My tie was crooked. I looked like what I was, a craftsman in a borrowed suit. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and stepped out. The main house was glowing with warm, golden light. Music drifted out from the open doors, a somber cello piece that sounded expensive and mournful. I entered through the side door, the one near the kitchen. I didn't want to walk through the front entrance and have the butler take my wet coat with that look of pity he always gave me. The kitchen was a war zone of caterers. Waiters in white jackets were arranging trays of canapes, smoked salmon, caviar, truffle-infused cheeses. The smell was overwhelming, clashing with the scent of wet wool from my suit. "Liam!" The head cook Marco spotted me. He was a large man with a moustache that twitched when he was stressed. He paused in the middle of plating a tray of shrimp. "Marco," I nodded. "It smells good." "You look terrible, kid," Marco said, his voice lowering. He wiped his hands on his apron and reached under the counter. He pulled out a small plate with a ham sandwich on it. "Here, real food. Not that fish foam stuff out there. Eat." I took the sandwich gratefully. "Thanks, Marco. You're a lifesaver." "She's on a rampage," Marco warned, jerking his head towards the dining room doors. "Micromanaging everything. She changed the menu 3 times this morning, on the day of the funeral. Who does that?" "Evelyn likes perfection," I said, taking a bite. The bread was stale, but it tasted like heaven. "She likes control," Marco corrected. "Watch your back, Liam. The wolf is off the leash now that the lion is gone." I finished the sandwich quickly, washed my face in the staff sink, and straightened my tie. I had to go out there. I had to pay my respects to the few genuine friends Arthur had. I pushed through the swinging doors into the main hallway. The transformation was jarring. The house was already different. The large portrait of Arthur that usually hung in the foyer, a painting of him in his workshop apron smiling, was gone. In its place was a generic landscape painting of a stormy ocean. I felt a spike of anger. He hadn't been in the ground for 2 hours, and she was already erasing him. The living room was full. The hum of conversation was low and polite. I recognized business partners, distant cousins, and members of the country club. I moved through the room, nodding at people I knew. Some nodded back awkwardly. Others looked through me. I saw Mason near the bar. He was holding a glass of scotch, Arthur's 25-year-old single malt, the bottle he was saving for my wedding. Mason was laughing loudly at something a young woman was saying. He leaned in close, his hand resting casually on her waist. He didn't look like a grieving son. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. I turned away disgusted. I needed fresh air. I headed toward the French doors that led to the patio. "Liam!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the low murmur of the room like a glass shattering. I stopped and turned. Evelyn was standing at the foot of the grand staircase. She had removed her veil. Her makeup was flawless. She held a glass of champagne, her fingers gripping the stem tightly. "Evelyn," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We need to discuss the seating arrangements for dinner," she interrupted, walking toward me. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor. Click, click, click. She stopped 2 feet away from me. She smelled of expensive flowers and something metallic. "I assumed I would sit in my usual spot," I said. "To the left of Dad's chair?" She smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was the smile a shark gives before it bites. "Oh, Liam," she sighed, as if explaining something to a slow child. "Today is about family. It's about the legacy Arthur left behind. It's a very intimate gathering for the estate executors and the direct heirs." My stomach dropped. "I'm his son, Evelyn." "You were his ward," she corrected softly, her voice low so the guests nearby couldn't hear. "A wonderful gesture of his charity. And we are all so grateful for the company you provided him in the workshop. But this... She swept her hand around the room, encompassing the house, the guests, the wealth. This is a legal matter. This is blood. She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes locking onto mine. The main dining table is fully booked, she said. Mason, myself, the lawyers, and the investors. Serious conversations will be had. You understand, don't you? You wouldn't be comfortable. You don't speak the language of finance. I felt the heat rising in my neck. I speak the language of my father. I know what he wanted. He wanted everyone to be taken care of, she said dismissively. And you will be. I've asked Marco to set a place for you in the kitchen. Or, if you prefer, you can take a plate out to that shed of yours. You always seemed happier there anyway, among the dust. It was a public execution performed in a whisper. She was telling me, in the clearest terms possible, that my time in this house was over. The buffer was gone. Arthur was gone. I looked at her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the tray of hors d'oeuvres. I wanted to tell her that she was a parasite who had sucked the life out of a good man. But I didn't. Arthur had taught me discipline. Measure twice, cut once, he always said. Reacting in anger is like sawing against the grain. You just tear the wood. I took a deep breath. I adjusted my cuffs. The kitchen will be fine, I said quietly. Evelyn's smile widened, triumphant. Excellent. I knew you would be reasonable. Try not to make a mess, dear. We have potential buyers coming tomorrow to look at the property. She turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd of wealthy mourners. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed. Buyers? She was selling the house? I looked across the room and saw a man standing in the shadow of a bookshelf. He was older, with a rumpled grey suit and messy white hair that looked like he had just woken up. He held a plate of food but wasn't eating. He was watching me. It was Mr. Vance. No relation, surprisingly. Jeremiah Vance, Dad's old lawyer. The one everyone said was senile. The one Evelyn had been trying to fire for 5 years. He caught my eye. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just raised a cracker to his lips, took a slow bite, and gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of greeting. It was a nod of acknowledgement. Like a coach watching a player take a hit and waiting to see if he would get back up. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. I would eat with Marco. I would sit on a stool and listen to the dishwasher hum. But I wouldn't leave. Not yet. I had a puzzle piece in my pocket, and I had a feeling the game had just begun. The kitchen was warm. That was the only good thing about it. I sat on a wooden stool near the prep island. Marco had placed a linen napkin on the counter for me, a small gesture of dignity in an undignified situation. I ate the rest of the sandwich in silence. Through the swinging doors, I could hear the party. It didn't sound like a funeral reception anymore. The volume had risen. I heard laughter. I heard the clink of crystal glasses. I heard someone make a toast, followed by a round of applause. They were celebrating. They weren't celebrating Arthur's life. They were celebrating his money. They were celebrating the vacuum he had left behind, eager to rush in and fill it. "Do you want some coffee, kid?" Marco asked. He was scrubbing a pot with unnecessary force. "No thanks, Marco," I said. "I should probably..." The swinging doors flew open. Mason stumbled in. He had loosened his tie, and his top button was undone. His face was flushed, a mixture of alcohol and adrenaline. He was carrying an empty bottle of wine. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes narrowed, then widened into a mocking grin. "There he is," Mason announced to the empty room. The ghost of the manor, hiding with the help. He walked over to the wine fridge, swaying slightly. He fumbled with the handle. Mason, maybe you've had enough, Marco said, his voice low but firm. Marco had been a boxer in his youth. He wasn't afraid of a spoiled brat in a suit. Mason spun around, his finger pointing aggressively. You cook, Marco. That's what you do. You don't tell the owner of the house when he's had enough. Owner? The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Mason grabbed another bottle. It was a Chateau Margaux, one of Arthur's favorites. He didn't even look at the label. He just wanted more liquid. He turned to me. Enjoying your scraps, Liam? I stood up. I wiped my mouth with a napkin and placed it neatly on the counter. I'm just leaving, Mason. Leaving? Mason laughed. He walked toward me, invading my personal space. He smelled of scotch and expensive cologne. You're not just leaving the room, Liam. You're leaving the narrative. That's what Mom says. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's going to gut this place, he sneered. She hates the wood paneling. Too dark, too old. She wants marble. White marble everywhere, like a mausoleum. He poked me in the chest with a finger. And that workshop of yours? The shed? He laughed again. Bulldozer bait. We're going to put a pool there. A big, heated infinity pool. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I could feel the tension radiating up my arms. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to smash his perfect teeth. But then I saw his eyes. They were empty. He was terrified. He was a small, insecure man trying to wear a giant's armor. Arthur was a giant. Mason was just a noise. I unclenched my hands. Goodbye, Mason, I said calmly. I walked past him. He shouted something after me, an insult about my mother or my orphan status. But I let the swinging door cut him off. I didn't go back to the party. I went out the back door into the rain. The air outside was cold, but it felt clean. I took a deep breath, letting the rain soak into my shirt. I walked across the wet lawn toward the carriage house. This was my real home. The workshop was a large stone building covered in ivy. Inside, it smelled of sawdust, varnish, and old oil. It was a smell that instantly lowered my heart rate. I flipped the switch. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered and hummed to life. There it was, my universe. The workbenches were lined up in neat rows. The walls were covered in tools, chisels, saws, planes, clamps, all organized by size and function. Arthur was obsessive about organization. A cluttered bench is a cluttered mind, he used to say. I walked over to the main bench. In the center sat our unfinished project. It was a restoration piece, an 18th century high-boy dresser. It had been damaged in a fire, its veneer peeled and blackened. We had spent the last 6 months slowly bringing it back to life. We had scraped away the burns, matched the grain, and were just beginning the French polish. I ran my hand over the smooth wood. It felt warm, alive. We never finished the legs, I whispered to the empty room. I took off my suit jacket and hung it on a nail. I rolled up my sleeves. I couldn't leave it like this. I had to do something. I had to work. It was the only way I knew how to grieve. I picked up a scraper. I started working on a rough patch on the back leg. The repetitive motion was soothing. Scrape, smooth. Scrape, smooth. The sound was rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I lost track of time. The party music faded, the rain stopped. It was just me and the wood. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of heels on the concrete floor broke my trance. I froze. I didn't turn around immediately. I knew who it was. Only one person walked with that aggressive staccato rhythm. I thought I'd find you here, Evelyn said. I turned slowly. She was standing in the doorway. She had changed out of a funeral dress into something equally black but more practical, a sharp pantsuit. She held a clipboard in her hand. She looked out of place in the workshop. She looked like a diamond in a bucket of coal. Evelyn, I said, did you get lost? She stepped inside, looking around with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. She ran a gloved finger over a dusty sawhorse and inspected the grime on her fingertip. It's amazing, she said. Arthur spent millions on the main house. Yet he spent all his time in this garage. It's a workshop, I corrected. It's where he created things. It's where he hid, she countered. He hid from his responsibilities. He hid from his social standing. And he hid with you. She walked toward me, stopping on the other side of the workbench. The unfinished dresser stood between us like a barricade. We need to talk about logistics, Liam, she said, her voice businesslike. She tapped the clipboard with a pen. Can't this wait until tomorrow? I asked. We just buried him. The world doesn't stop for the dead, she said coldly. And neither does the bank. Arthur's finances were complex, illiquid. He tied up a lot of capital in sentimental projects. She looked at me pointedly. We are bringing in a liquidation team tomorrow morning, she announced. They will inventory everything. The furniture, the art, the cars, and this. She waved her hand at the tools. This? I felt a cold chill. These are tools, Evelyn. They aren't assets. They're old. Half of them are hand-me-downs. Antique hand tools are quite valuable, she said, consulting her list. I've already had a preliminary appraisal done. The set of Japanese chisels alone is worth $5,000. The vintage planes, another 10. Those were gifts, I said, my voice rising. He gave them to me. For my birthdays, for Christmas. Do you have receipts? She asked. I stared at her. Receipts? For birthday presents? Without proof of purchase or a deed of gift, they are part of the estate, she said simply. And as the executor, I have a fiduciary duty to maximize the value of the estate for the heirs. I am an heir, I shouted. I couldn't help it. The dam broke. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me with pity. Liam, she sighed. We went over this. You are a beneficiary of his kindness, not his estate. There is no adoption paper. There is no blood test. You were a hobby. And now, the hobby is over. She looked at her watch. The appraisers arrive at 8 a.m. tomorrow, she said. This building will be padlocked tonight at midnight for insurance purposes. You cannot be in here. You're kicking me out of the workshop? I'm asking you to vacate the premises, she corrected. The entire premises. The guest room you stay in? We need to stage it for the real estate photos. The garage? Locked. She looked me in the eye. You have until midnight to collect your personal effects. Clothes, toiletries, that's it. Anything that belongs to the house stays in the house. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Midnight? That's in 2 hours. Where am I supposed to go? You're a grown man, Liam, she said, turning to leave. You have a trade. Surely you can figure it out. Arthur always said you were resourceful. She stopped at the door and looked back. Oh, and Liam, don't take anything valuable. We have security cameras everywhere now. I'd hate to call the police on the day of my husband's funeral. It would look so tacky. She walked out into the night. I stood there for a long time. The silence in the workshop was deafening. She was taking everything, not just the money. I didn't care about the money. She was taking the history. She was selling the chisels Arthur had taught me to hold. She was selling the saws that had cut the wood for my first birdhouse. She was liquidating my memories. I looked at the clock on the wall, 10:15 p.m. I didn't have time to mourn. I had to move. I grabbed an old duffel bag from the corner. It was covered in sawdust, but it was sturdy. I went to my small locker in the back. I took out my change of clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, my work boots. I stripped off the suit. I tore the tie from my neck and threw it in the trash. I never wanted to wear a suit again. I put on my work clothes. I felt like myself again. I looked at the wall of tools. I couldn't take them. She was right about the cameras. I saw the red blinking light in the corner of the ceiling. She had installed it recently. I hadn't realized why until now. But there were things she wouldn't notice. Things that had no value to an appraiser, but infinite value to me. I went to the scrap bin. I dug through the pile of offcuts. I found a piece of walnut from the first chair we built. I found a block of cherry from the crib we made for a cousin's baby. I shoved them into my bag. Then I went to the drafting table. Arthur's sketchbook was there. It was a leather-bound journal where he drew his ideas. It contained the designs for every piece of furniture he had made in the last 20 years. It also contained his notes, his thoughts, his little messages to himself. Design for Liam's desk. Make the legs sturdy. He leans when he thinks. I traced the handwriting with my finger. This book was worth more than the house. I looked at the camera. The angle was wide, but the drafting table was in the shadows. I took a stack of old sandpaper and placed it on the table, making it look like a pile of trash. Then, using my body to block the camera's view, I slid the sketchbook under my shirt. I tucked it into the waistband of my jeans, pulling my flannel shirt over it. It was theft. I was stealing from my own father. But I knew he would have wanted me to have it. I looked around the room one last time. The unfinished highboy dresser stood in the center, a ghost of a project that would never be completed. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered. "I can't finish it here." I grabbed my duffel bag. I picked up my old toolbox, the plastic one I bought myself at a hardware store when I was 16. It contained my cheap hammer, my measuring tape, and a few screwdrivers. Evelyn couldn't claim those. They were junk. I walked to the door. I switched off the lights. The workshop plunged into darkness. The smell of cedar lingered in the air. A final goodbye. I walked out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground wet and reflective. I walked toward my truck. I threw the bag in the passenger seat. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I looked up at the main house. The lights were still blazing. I could see silhouettes moving in the windows. They were still drinking, still celebrating. Evelyn was probably in the library, calculating the net worth of the estate. Mason was probably passed out in the guest wing. They had the house. They had the money. They had the legal standing. But as I felt the hard spine of the sketchbook pressing against my ribs, I knew I had something they didn't. I had the blueprints. I started the engine. The truck roared to life, shattering the polite silence of the neighborhood. I didn't care who heard. I shifted into gear and drove down the long, winding driveway. I passed the iron gates. I turned onto the main road and didn't look back. I was homeless. I was broke. I was alone. But I was the architect's son, and I had work to do. I didn't go far. My truck, old and faithful as it was, had a fuel gauge that hovered dangerously close to empty. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner near the industrial district. It was 2 a.m. The neon sign buzzed with a sound like an angry hornet, flickering between open and oper. I reclined the seat as far as it would go, which wasn't much. The steering wheel pressed against my knees. I wrapped my flannel jacket around me like a blanket. It smelled of sawdust and rain. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Every time I drifted off, I saw the image of the excavator. I saw the yellow metal claw tearing into the roof of the workshop, crushing the stone walls, burying the memories under rubble. I knew Evelyn. She wouldn't wait. She probably had the demolition crew scheduled for dawn. I reached under the seat and pulled out the sketchbook. In the dim orange light of the street lamp, the leather cover looked black. I ran my hand over the embossed initials. A.V. Arthur Vance. I opened it. The pages crackled. They were filled with sketches of chair legs, dovetail joints, and intricate scrollwork. Arthur wasn't just a carpenter. He was an engineer of wood. He understood how trees wanted to bend and how they wanted to break. I flipped to the back, the last entry. It was dated 3 days before he died. The lines were shaky, drawn with a trembling hand, but the vision was clear. It wasn't a piece of furniture. It was a mechanism. The timekeeper, he had written at the top. It was a design for a standing clock, but unlike any I had seen. The body was a complex lattice of interlocking wood like a puzzle. There were no screws, no nails, just wood holding wood, tension holding tension. In the margin, he had written a note. To build this, you must understand patience. The wood will fight you. The world will fight you. But if the joints are true, it will stand. Time tells the truth. I traced the drawing. It was beautiful. It was impossible. It would take months to build, and it required expensive hardwoods, mahogany, ebony, rosewood. I had $40 in my wallet and a truck that needed gas. I closed the book. The dream was nice, but the reality was the cold window pane against my cheek. I was a craftsman without a shop, a son without a father. I drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of falling trees. Morning came with a sharp knock on the window. "Hey, you can't sleep here. Customers only." A waitress with tired eyes was glaring at me through the glass. I sat up, my neck stiff and aching. "Sorry, I'm leaving." I started the truck. The engine whined in protest before catching. I drove out of the lot, squinting against the harsh morning sun. I needed a base. I couldn't build a life from the cab of a pickup. I spent the morning driving through the industrial outskirts of the city. I looked for rent signs on warehouses, garages, anything with a roof. The prices were absurd. $2,000 a month for a damp storage unit. $3,000 for a shared garage with a mechanic who looked like he chopped cars for a living. By noon, I was desperate. I parked in front of a dilapidated brick building at the end of a dead-end street. It used to be a textile factory, now carved up into cheap rental spaces. The windows were barred. Weeds grew through the cracks in the pavement. A sign hung crookedly on the chain-link fence. Space available. Cash only. I called the number. 10 minutes later, a landlord named Sal arrived. He was a short man chewing on a toothpick, wearing a tracksuit that had seen better decades. "It ain't the Ritz," Sal said, unlocking a rusty rolling door. He threw it open. The metal screeched like a banshee. Inside, it was a concrete box. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light coming through the high, dirty windows. There was a single light bulb hanging from a wire. In the corner, a leaky pipe dripped water into a puddle that had turned green with algae. 400 square feet, Sal said, spitting his toothpick onto the floor. Power works. Water works mostly. Toilet is down the hall, shared with the auto body guys. "How much?" I asked. $800 a month. First and last upfront. I looked at the space. It was cold, it was damp, it was ugly. But it had high ceilings. It had a solid concrete floor for heavy machinery, and it was quiet. I'll take it, I said. Cash, Sal reminded me. I don't do checks, and no cops. I nodded. I need to go to the bank. I drove to the nearest branch of the Citibank. It was the bank Arthur used. I had a joint account there. One he had set up for me when I turned 18. It was for emergencies and tuition, he had said. I had never touched it, preferring to earn my own way working in the shop. But I knew there was about $5,000 in there, enough to get started, enough to buy wood. I walked up to the teller. She smiled politely. I'd like to make a withdrawal, I said, sliding my debit card and ID across the counter. She typed on her keyboard, then she frowned. She typed again, harder this time. Mr. Vance? She asked, looking up with a confused expression. Yes, I'm getting an error message. It says the account has been frozen. My blood ran cold. Frozen? Why? It's flagged as estate pending litigation, she said, reading the screen. The executor of the main estate has placed a hold on all associated accounts to consolidate assets for probate. Evelyn. She hadn't just kicked me out. She was scorching the earth. She knew about this account. She knew it was my only safety net. But that's a joint account, I argued, my voice rising slightly. My name is on it. It's my money. I understand, sir, the teller said, her voice dropping to a practiced calm. But when the primary account holder is deceased, the executor has the right to freeze assets until the audit is complete. It's standard procedure. How long? I asked. Probate can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. 6 months. I would be starved to death in 6 weeks. Is there anything I can access? I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. She checked again. You have a personal savings account, balance $42.50. I stared at her. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, a hysterical, jagged thing. $42. That wouldn't even cover the gas to drive back to Sal's place. Thank you, I said. I took my card back. My hand was shaking. I walked out of the bank. The sun was shining. People were walking their dogs. Cars were driving by. The world was normal. But my world had just collapsed. I sat on the curb outside the bank. I put my head in my hands. She had won. She had stripped me naked. I had no home, no workshop, no money, and no family. I looked at my truck. It was all I had left. I could sell it. It might fetch $2,000. That would get me into the shop, maybe buy a few tools. But then I couldn't deliver furniture. I couldn't pick up lumber. A carpenter without a truck is useless. I looked down at my wrist. I was wearing a watch. It was a Patek Philippe, vintage, rose gold. Arthur had given it to me on my 21st birthday. A man should know the value of time, he had said, fastening it on my wrist. This watch has a heartbeat, Liam, just like you. Take care of it and it will outlast us both. It was the most valuable thing I owned. It was worth more than the truck, maybe more than the workshop. I ran my thumb over the glass face. I could feel the steady tick, tick, tick against my pulse. It was the only piece of him I had left, besides the sketchbook. If I sold it, I was selling a memory. I was selling his gift. But if I kept it, I was just a homeless guy with a nice watch. Arthur didn't raise a sentimental fool. He raised a builder. And builders need materials. I stood up. I wiped the dust off my jeans. I knew where the pawn shop was. The pawn shop smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. The man behind the counter, a guy named Rick, who looked like he was made of leather, examined the watch with a jeweler's loupe. He whistled low. "It's real," he said, sounding surprised. "Where'd a guy like you get a piece like this?" "My father," I said. The words were short, hard. "It's worth 20 on the market," Rick said. "But this is a pawn shop. I gotta make a profit. I'll give you 8. $8,000. It was robbery, but it was also freedom. "Make it 10, I said. "And I want a buyback option for 6 months. Rick looked at me. He saw the sawdust on my boots. He saw the look in my eyes. He knew I wasn't a junkie. I was a man in a corner. 9, Rick said. "Cash. And you have 90 days to buy it back with 20% interest." I looked at the watch one last time. Tick, tick, tick. "Deal," I said. I unclasped it. The skin beneath the band was pale, lighter than the rest of my arm. I placed it on the velvet tray. It looked lonely there. Rick counted out the bills. Hundreds. A thick stack. I took the money. It felt heavy in my pocket. It didn't feel like wealth. It felt like sacrifice. 2 hours later, I was back at the brick factory. I paid Sal the rent. I bought a broom, a mop, and a gallon of bleach. I spent the rest of the day scrubbing. I scrubbed the floor until my knuckles bled. I scrubbed the walls. I scrubbed the green slime from the sink. I was scrubbing away the anger. I was scrubbing away the humiliation. By sunset, the space was clean. It was empty, echoing, and smelled of chlorine. But it was mine. I backed the truck up to the rolling door. I unloaded my toolbox. I set up a makeshift workbench using 2 sawhorses and a sheet of plywood I found in the alley. I took the sketchbook out of the truck and placed it in the center of the plywood. I turned on the single overhead bulb. It cast a stark, yellow circle of light on the book. I had $9,000 left. I needed a table saw. I needed a planer. I needed clamps. And I needed wood. I opened the sketchbook to the drawing of the clock, the timekeeper. I looked at the complex joints Arthur had drawn. He had designed it to be difficult. He had designed it to be a test. "Okay, Dad," I whispered. "You want to see if I was listening?" I grabbed a piece of the scrap walnut I had stolen from the old workshop. It was small, just a block. I picked up my chisel and a mallet. I didn't have the machines yet, but I had my hands. I set the chisel against the wood. I took a breath. Thwack! The sound was sharp and loud in the empty room. A curl of dark wood fell to the concrete floor. It wasn't much. Just a chip. But it was a start. I wasn't the heir to the Vance fortune anymore. I wasn't the boy in the mansion. I was Liam. I was a woodworker, and I was going to build my way back to the truth, one shaving at a time. I looked at the shadow on the wall. For a second, just a second, it looked like there were 2 of us standing there. Then I raised the mallet again. Thwack! Winter came early to the industrial district. It wasn't the picturesque winter of the Vance estate, where snow dusted the manicured hedges like powdered sugar and the driveway was heated to prevent ice. Here, winter was a physical assault. The brick walls of the old textile factory had no insulation. The wind whistled through the gaps in the rolling metal door, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and diesel fumes. I slept on a second-hand cot in the corner, buried under 3 wool blankets, wearing a beanie hat pulled low over my ears. My mornings began not with the smell of Marco's freshly ground espresso, but with the shriek of the alarm on my phone and the sight of my own breath puffing into the freezing air. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. I rolled off the cot, my joints stiff. The concrete floor seemed to suck the heat right out of my boots. I walked to the small utility sink and splashed icy water on my face. There was no hot water heater. Sal, the landlord, said he was working on it, which meant it would never happen. I made instant coffee using a hot plate. It tasted like burnt dirt, but the caffeine was necessary. I looked at the workbench. It was the only warm thing in the room. The timekeeper was no longer just a drawing. It was beginning to take shape, or at least its skeleton was. I had spent the last 20 days preparing the wood. I had bought small, expensive blocks of ebony and rosewood with the pawn shop money, treating each piece like a holy relic. I couldn't afford a mistake. One slip of the chisel, one miscalculation in the grain direction, and $100 of material and days of labor would be ruined. I picked up the piece I was working on, the escapement gear. In a normal clock, this would be made of brass. It would be stamped out by a machine in a factory in China. But Arthur's design called for lignum vitae, the hardest, densest wood in the world. It was self-lubricating, oily, and tough as stone. I had to carve the teeth of the gear by hand. I sat down at the bench, turning on the singular bright lamp. I put on my magnifiers. Scrape. Blow away the dust. Check with the caliper. Scrape again. It was microsurgery. As I worked, the rhythmic scraping sound triggered a memory. It sounded like the scratching of a pen on paper. The hospital room was sterile and white. The only color came from the bouquet of flowers I had brought, yellow tulips, because Arthur said they reminded him of sawdust. Arthur was sitting up in bed, looking small. The chemotherapy had stripped the weight from his frame. His skin was grey, like weathered teak. He was scratching a pen furiously across a notepad. "Dad, you need to rest," I said, adjusting the IV drip. "The doctor said your white blood count is low." "The doctor is a mechanic," Arthur grunted without looking up. "He fixes the body. I'm fixing the estate." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound that made my chest ache. "Where is she?" he asked suddenly. I froze. I knew who he meant. "She's in transit," I lied. Evelyn was in Milan, Fashion Week. I had called her 3 times. She had sent a text back. "Don't be dramatic, Liam. It's just the checkup. I'll be back on Tuesday." It wasn't a checkup. It was stage 4. Arthur looked at me over his reading glasses. His eyes were sharp, undimmed by the drugs. "Don't lie to me, Liam. You're a terrible liar. Your left eye twitches." I sighed and sat in the chair next to the bed. "She's in Italy. She said she couldn't get a flight out until the show is over." Arthur chuckled softly. It was a sad, resigned sound. "Of course, the fall collection. Vital stuff." He dropped the pen and leaned back, closing his eyes. "It's my fault," he whispered. "I married the portfolio, not the partner. I thought if I gave her everything she wanted, she would eventually want me." I reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, just like mine. "You have me," I said. He squeezed my hand. "I know, that's the problem. I'm leaving you in a den of vipers, Liam, and I haven't given you a stick to defend yourself." "I don't need a stick," I said. "I can build my own." He opened his eyes and looked at me with intense seriousness. "Listen to me. When I go, they will try to erase me. They will turn my life into a number. They will sell the soul of the company." He pointed to the notebook. "I'm trying to write it down, the protections, the clauses, but the lawyers, they make it so complicated. They talk about bloodlines and statutes." He gripped my hand harder. Promise me something. If the walls fall down, if they take the house, the money, the name, you keep the craft. You keep the standard. Because the standard is the only thing that's real. The rest is just noise. I promise, I said. And one more thing, he smiled weakly. Don't tell her I was scared. Let her think I went out like a boss. It's the only gift I have left for her. My hand slipped. The chisel gouged a tiny scratch into the face of the gear. Damn it! I slammed the tool down on the bench. The noise echoed in the empty warehouse. I took a deep breath, counting to 10. I picked up the gear and inspected it. It was salvageable. I could sand it out. But it was close. I was tired, I was hungry, and I was angry. Arthur had protected her until the end. He had let her keep her dignity while she stripped him of his. And now, she was using that dignity to crush me. I needed a break. I needed to step away from the microscope. I stood up and walked to the large rolling door. I hauled on the chain, pulling it up with a groan of rusty metal. The sunlight hit me, blindingly bright. I stepped out onto the loading dock. The air was crisp. Across the alley, the mechanics at the auto body shop were shouting at each other over the sound of an impact wrench. It was the sound of work. It felt grounding. I pulled out my phone. I knew I shouldn't, but I opened the social media app. It was everywhere. The Vance estate announces new strategic direction. I clicked on the article. There was a photo of Evelyn. She was standing at a podium, looking mournful yet powerful. Behind her was a rendering of a new building. "We are honoring the memory of Arthur Vance," the article quoted her, "by modernizing his vision. The Vance Furniture Company will be pivoting from custom, handcrafted pieces to high-end, scalable lifestyle solutions." Scalable, lifestyle, solutions. Translation? Mass production, particle board, cheap labor. She was killing the company. She was taking the name that stood for quality and pasting it onto garbage to make a quick buck. And then I saw the second photo. It was Mason. He was leaning against a bright red Ferrari. The caption read, "Air Mason Vance spotted at the Club 55 launch party. Living life to the fullest, just like Dad would have wanted," he says. Just like Dad would have wanted. I threw the phone. It skittered across the concrete dock and cracked against the brick wall. I didn't care. I couldn't look at it anymore. Bad news? I turned. Sal was standing there, holding a greasy bag from a burger joint. "Something like that," I muttered. Sal looked at the phone, then at me. He tossed me a burger wrapped in foil. "Eat," he grunted. "You look like a skeleton. Can't pay rent if you starve to death." I caught the burger. It was warm. "Thanks, Sal." "You got a visitor," Sal said, jerking his thumb toward the street. I frowned. "A visitor? Nobody knows I'm here." "Guy in a suit. Looks like a penguin that got lost. He's been sitting in that old sedan for 20 minutes. My heart skipped a beat. A suit? Was it the police? Had Evelyn found a way to arrest me for stealing my own sketchbook? I walked to the edge of the lot. Parked near the entrance, next to a dumpster, was a dusty gray Buick. Inside sat a man reading a newspaper. It wasn't the police. It was Mr. Vance, the lawyer, Jeremiah. I walked over and tapped on the glass. He rolled the window down slowly. The electric motor whined as if it was in pain. "Good afternoon, Liam," he said. His voice was gravelly and slow. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the crossword puzzle in his lap. "Do you know a 6-letter word for resilience?" "What are you doing here, Mr.
Vance?" I asked, ignoring the puzzle. "I brought you something," he said. He reached into the passenger seat and picked up a brown paper bag. He handed it to me through the window. I took it. It was heavy.
"What is it?"
"Arthur left a few things in my office over the years," Jeremiah said. "Small things. Things he didn't want in the safe at the house. He said, if the boy ever goes into the wilderness, give him these." I opened the bag. Inside were 3 old, worn Japanese sharpening stones and a small sealed envelope. My throat tightened. These were Arthur's favorite stones, the ones he used to sharpen his personal chisels. He had told me he lost them years ago. "Why now?" I asked. Jeremiah finally looked at me. His eyes were rheumy and tired, but there was a spark of steel behind them. "Because the probate period is starting," he said. "Evelyn's lawyers are filing motions to expedite the process. They want to declare the estate settled by the end of the month. Can they do that?" "They can try," Jeremiah said. "They have expensive lawyers, sharks in suits. I'm just an old tortoise." He smiled a little. "But tortoises have hard shells, Liam. Remember that." He started the car. "Wait," I said. "The envelope, what's in it?" "I don't know," Jeremiah lied. I could tell he was lying. "Arthur sealed it. He said, open only when the dust settles. Or maybe it was when the sawdust settles." He liked puns. "Is there a chance, Mr. Vance?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Is there a chance I can get the workshop back? Just the workshop. They can keep the mansion." Jeremiah sighed. He looked at the grim factory building behind me. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, Liam. Right now, they possess the keys. But the law also cares about intent. Arthur's intent." He shifted the car into drive. "Keep building, son. Whatever it is you're building in there, keep building. Evidence of character is harder to fake than a bank statement." He drove away, the grey Buick disappearing into the smog of the industrial park. I stood there holding the bag of stones. I opened the envelope. It wasn't money. It wasn't a deed. It was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, 10 years old, standing on a crate to reach the workbench. Arthur was standing behind me, his hands over mine, guiding a handplane. We were both covered in shavings. We were both laughing. On the back, in Arthur's handwriting, were 3 words: the real inheritance. I stared at the photo. Evelyn had the house. Mason had the Ferrari. But they didn't have this. They didn't have the memory of his hands on theirs. They didn't have the skill he had transferred, hour by hour, day by day, into my muscles and bones. Evidence of character, Jeremiah had said. I looked back at the cold, ugly factory. I walked back inside. I put the burger on the bench. I took the Japanese stones out of the bag. I went to the sink and soaked the stones in water. Then I picked up the chisel that had slipped earlier, the one that was slightly dull. I began to sharpen. Swish, swish, swish. The sound was different now. It wasn't the sound of desperation. It was the sound of preparation. I worked through the night. I didn't feel the cold anymore. 3 days later, the money was running out faster than I anticipated. I had 7,000 left after buying the wood and paying the rent. But then, the unexpected costs hit. The old bandsaw I bought from a liquidation sale needed a new motor. That was $400. I needed a specialized router bit for the clock's joinery. $200. Food, electricity, gas for the heater I finally bought because my fingers were getting too numb to hold a pencil. I did the math on the back of a napkin. At this rate, I would be broke in 6 weeks. The clock would take at least 3 months to finish.
I needed income. I couldn't get big commissions. I was blacklisted. Evelyn had whispered in the ears of the interior designers and architects in the city. Liam is unstable, she had probably said. He stole from the estate. He's having a breakdown. Nobody wanted to hire a thief. So I went lower. I posted an ad on the community bulletin board at the local hardware store. Not the fancy lumberyard where the contractors went, but the big box store where DIY dads bought lawnmowers. Furniture repair, honest work, cash only. I got my first call that afternoon.
Yeah, hi. Is this Liam?
A woman's voice, older, skeptical. Yes, ma'am. I got a dining chair. The leg snapped. My husband tried to glue it with super glue and made a mess. Can you fix it? I can, I said. How much? I hesitated. A proper restoration of a chair leg, stripping the bad glue, doweling the joint, matching the finish. It was a 3-hour job. Arthur would have charged $300 minimum. $40, I said. 30, she countered. I closed my eyes. 30, bring it over. She arrived an hour later in a minivan. She dumped the chair on the loading dock. It was a cheap, mass-produced oak chair. The kind Evelyn would have burned for firewood. But I took it. I treated that cheap chair like it was a Louis XIV antique. I scraped away the superglue with a surgical blade. I drilled a clean hole and inserted a maple dowel. I mixed a custom stain to match the fake oak finish. When she came back the next day, she stared at it. "You can't even tell where it broke," she said, amazed. She handed me 3 crumpled $10 bills. "You're too good for this," she said, looking around my bleak workshop. "Why are you working here?" "I'm just starting over," I said. "Well," she said, opening her minivan door. "My sister has a table that wobbles. I'll give her your number." That was how it started. The winter of greed wasn't just about Evelyn's greed. It was about my survival. I became the ghost carpenter of the neighborhood. I fixed wobbly tables for grandmothers. I re-glued drawers for college students. I repaired a broken guitar neck for a street busker. I worked on the timekeeper from midnight until 4 a.m. Then I slept for 4 hours. Then I fixed broken junk for cash to buy noodles and sandpaper. My hands were always bleeding. My back always ached. But word began to spread. Not among the elite, but among the people. "There's a guy in the old textile plant. He's a magician with wood. And he's cheap." I was building a new reputation. One $30 job at a time. But every time I drove past a newsstand, I saw the Vance Corp stock rising. Evelyn was selling off the timber reserves. She was liquidating the raw materials Arthur had saved for 20 years. She was selling the future to pay for the present. I looked at my clock. The intricate wooden gears were slowly coming together. I was doing the opposite. I was sacrificing the present to build the future. And I prayed that when the time came, the clock would run true. Because if it didn't, if I failed, I would just be the guy who fixed wobbly chairs for $30 forever. It started with a text message. It was from Marco. Just 3 words and a photo. They're clearing it. The photo was blurry, taken hastily through a kitchen window. It showed a yellow industrial dumpster sitting in the driveway of the Vance estate. It was already half full. I stared at the screen of my cracked phone. My workshop was freezing. The space heater was humming, but it was fighting a losing battle against the December chill. I dropped the chisel I was holding. I knew what this meant. Evelyn wasn't just selling the company. She was erasing the history. She was sanitizing the house before the real estate agents came to take their glossy photos. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed my jacket and keys. I ran to the truck. The drive to the estate was a blur. I drove too fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The heater in the truck wasn't working, but I was sweating. When I turned onto the long driveway, I saw the cars. It wasn't a private family affair. It was a circus. There were vans from antique dealers. There were pickup trucks from local scavengers. There were luxury sedans of collectors. A sign was planted in the lawn, right next to the weeping willow tree Arthur had planted for my mother. Estate sale. Everything must go. I parked on the grass, ignoring the valet who tried to wave me away. I slammed the door and marched toward the house. The front doors were wide open. Strangers were walking in and out, carrying lamps, paintings, and boxes of books. It looked like a looting. I pushed past a couple arguing over the price of a rug and went straight to the back, toward the garage, toward the workshop. The scene that greeted me stopped me cold. The doors to the carriage house were thrown open. The contents, my life, Arthur's life, was spilled out onto the concrete driveway like guts. Tables were set up. On them sat the tools. The Japanese chisels, the hand planes, the antique saws. They were thrown into plastic bins labeled $50 each. My stomach turned. Those chisels were worth hundreds. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the disrespect. They were being treated like hardware store junk. I saw a man in a greasy jacket picking up Arthur's favorite smoothing plane, a Lie-Nielsen bronze beauty. He was handling it carelessly, banging the delicate sole against the table. "Hey!" I shouted. The man looked up, startled. "Put that down," I said, my voice shaking. "You hold it by the tote, not the blade." The man sneered. "Relax, buddy. I'm just looking. Price is good." I snatched it from his hand. "It's not for sale." "Actually," a voice drawled from behind me, "everything has a price." I turned. Mason was sitting on the hood of his car, watching the spectacle. He was wearing sunglasses, even though it was overcast. He held a clipboard. "Mason," I said, stepping toward him. "What are you doing? These are Dad's tools. You can't sell these to strangers." Mason shrugged. "Mom wants the garage cleared by Monday. We're putting in a home gym. The contractor needs the space empty." He gestured to the crowd of buyers. "Besides, look at them. They love this old junk. We've made $3,000 in the last hour. Easy money." "Junk?" I felt the heat rising in my face. "This is heritage. This is the only reason you have a roof over your head." Mason hopped off the car. He walked up to me, chewing gum loudly. "Save the speech, Liam. You want the tools? Buy them. Cash. Just like everyone else." He looked at the plane in my hand. "That one is, let's say, $100. Friends and family discount." I stared at him. He was enjoying this. He was selling my father's soul for pocket change, just to see me bleed. I reached for my wallet. I had $40 cash. I couldn't buy them. I couldn't save them all. I looked at the bins. Strangers were rummaging through them, tossing Arthur's precision instruments around like toys. I felt a wave of nausea. Then I saw it. Over by the dumpster, 2 men were hauling a large slab of wood. It was the Bobinga slab. It was a massive piece of African rosewood, 12 feet long, 3 inches thick. It had a deep reddish-purple grain that shimmered like water. Arthur had bought it 15 years ago.
He had been saving it. "This is the spirit wood, Liam," he had told me. "One day we will make the dining table for your own house with this. It will be the center of your family." The men were dragging it across the asphalt. I could hear the wood screaming as it scraped against the stones. "Stop!" I roared. I ran over to them. "Put it down! You're ruining the edge!" The men stopped, looking annoyed. One of them wiped sweat from his forehead. "We bought it, pal," the man said. "Mason sold it to us." I turned to Mason. "You sold the bubinga? Do you have any idea what that is?" Mason laughed. "It's a big plank, heavy as hell. These guys are doing me a favor taking it away." "What are you going to do with it?" I asked the buyer. "River table," the man said excitedly. "We're gonna cut it down the middle, pour blue epoxy resin in between, maybe put some LED lights in it. It's gonna look sick in my man cave." I felt like I had been slapped. They were going to cut it. They were going to pour plastic into it. They were going to destroy 15 years of waiting for a trend that would die in 6 months. "No," I said. "You can't." "It's a done deal," the man said, reaching for the slab again. "How much?" I asked. "How much did you pay?" $200, the man said. $200. Ideally, that slab was worth $4,000. "I'll give you $300, I said. The man hesitated. He looked at his friend. $500, Mason interjected. I spun around. Mason was smiling. "The price just went up," Mason said. "Demand dictates supply, right? If Liam wants it that bad, it must be worth something." I looked at Mason. He knew I was broke. He knew exactly what he was doing. "I don't have $500 on me," I said quietly. "Too bad," Mason said. "Take it away, boys." The men bent down to lift the slab. "Wait!" I pulled the watch out of my pocket. No, I didn't have the watch. I had pawned it. I patted my pockets desperately. I had nothing except the truck. I looked at my Ford pickup. It was my livelihood. It was how I moved materials. It was how I got to the workshop. "The truck," I said. Mason raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The truck," I pointed. "It's a 2005 Ford F-150, new transmission. It's worth $2,000 easy. Take it, in exchange for the wood and the tools in those bins." The crowd had gone quiet. People were watching. The rich son and the beggar son, bargaining over scraps. Mason walked over to the truck. He kicked the tire. He looked at the rust around the wheel well. "It's a piece of crap," Mason said. "But I do need a vehicle to haul trash to the dump. The leather seats in the Range Rover are too nice for garbage." He held out his hand. "Keys." I hesitated. If I gave him the truck, I was stranded. I would have to carry the wood. I would have to walk 5 miles back to the factory. But if I let them take the bubinga, if I let them pour plastic into Arthur's dream, I would never forgive myself. I pulled the keys out of my pocket. The metal was warm from my hand. I dropped them into Mason's palm. "Pleasure doing business," Mason smirked. He tossed the keys to one of the valets. "Park it round back. We'll use it for the landscaping crew." I turned to the 2 men holding the slab. "It's mine," I said. "Put it down." They shrugged and dropped the wood. It hit the ground with a heavy, resonant thud. I gathered the tools from the bins. I took off my jacket and wrapped the planes and chisels in it so they wouldn't bang together. I piled them on top of the wood slab. Then I stood there, looking at the massive piece of timber. It weighed at least 200 pounds. I was alone. I couldn't call a taxi for a 12-foot plank. I grabbed the end of the slab. When she came back the next day, she stared at it. "You can't even tell where it broke," she said, amazed.
She handed me 3 crumpled $10 bills. "You're too good for this," she said, looking around my bleak workshop. "Why are you working here?" "I'm just starting over," I said. "Well," she said, opening her minivan door, "my sister has a table that wobbles. I'll give her your number." That was how it started. The winter of greed wasn't just about Evelyn's greed, it was about my survival. I became the ghost carpenter of the neighborhood. I fixed wobbly tables for grandmothers. I re-glued drawers for college students. I repaired a broken guitar neck for a street busker. I worked on the timekeeper from midnight until 4 a.m. Then I slept for 4 hours. Then I fixed broken junk for cash to buy noodles and sandpaper. My hands were always bleeding. My back always ached. But word began to spread. Not among the elite, but among the people. "There's a guy in the old textile plant. He's a magician with wood. And he's cheap." I was building a new reputation. One $30 job at a time. But every time I drove past a newsstand, I saw the Vanscop stock rising. Evelyn was selling off the timber reserves. She was liquidating the raw materials Arthur had saved for 20 years. She was selling the future to pay for the present. I looked at my clock. The intricate wooden gears were slowly coming together. I was doing the opposite. I was sacrificing the present to build the future. And I prayed that when the time came, the clock would run true. Because if it didn't, if I failed, I would just be the guy who fixed wobbly chairs for $30 forever. It started with a text message. It was from Marco. Just 3 words and a photo. They're clearing it. The photo was blurry, taken hastily through a kitchen window. It showed a yellow industrial dumpster sitting in the driveway of the Vance estate. It was already half full. I stared at the screen of my cracked phone. My workshop was freezing. The space heater was humming, but it was fighting a losing battle against the December chill. I dropped the chisel I was holding. I knew what this meant. Evelyn wasn't just selling the company. She was erasing the history. She was sanitizing the house before the real estate agents came to take their glossy photos. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed my jacket and keys. I ran to the truck. The drive to the estate was a blur. I drove too fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The heater in the truck wasn't working, but I was sweating. When I turned onto the long driveway, I saw the cars. It wasn't a private family affair. It was a circus. There were vans from antique dealers. There were pickup trucks from local scavengers. There were luxury sedans of collectors. A sign was planted in the lawn, right next to the weeping willow tree Arthur had planted for my mother. "Estate sale. Everything must go." I parked on the grass, ignoring the valet who tried to wave me away. I slammed the door and marched toward the house. The front doors were wide open. Strangers were walking in and out, carrying lamps, paintings, and boxes of books. It looked like a looting. I pushed past a couple arguing over the price of a rug and went straight to the back, toward the garage, toward the workshop. The scene that greeted me stopped me cold. The doors to the carriage house were thrown open. The contents, my life, Arthur's life, were spilled out onto the concrete driveway like guts. Tables were set up. On them sat the tools. The Japanese chisels, the hand planes, the antique saws. They were thrown into plastic bins labeled $50 each. My stomach turned. Those chisels were worth hundreds. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the disrespect. They were being treated like hardware store junk. I saw a man in a greasy jacket picking up Arthur's favorite smoothing plane, a Lie Nielsen bronze beauty. He was handling it carelessly, banging the delicate sole against the table. "Hey!" I shouted. The man looked up, startled. Put that down, I said, my voice shaking. You hold it by the tote, not the blade. The man sneered. Relax, buddy, I'm just looking. Price is good. I snatched it from his hand. It's not for sale. Actually, a voice drawled from behind me. Everything has a price. I turned. Mason was sitting on the hood of his car, watching the spectacle. He was wearing sunglasses, even though it was overcast. He held a clipboard. Mason, I said, stepping toward him. What are you doing? These are Dad's tools. You can't sell these to strangers. Mason shrugged. Mom wants the garage cleared by Monday. We're putting in a home gym. The contractor needs the space empty. He gestured to the crowd of buyers. Besides, look at them. They love this old junk. We've made $3,000 in the last hour. Easy money. Junk? I felt the heat rising in my face. This is heritage. This is the only reason you have a roof over your head. Mason hopped off the car. He walked up to me, chewing gum loudly. Save the speech, Liam. You want the tools? Buy them. Cash, just like everyone else. He looked at the plane in my hand. That one is, let's say, $100. Friends and family discount. I stared at him. He was enjoying this. He was wearing sunglasses, even though it was overcast. He held a clipboard. Mason, I said, stepping toward him. What are you doing? These are Dad's tools. You can't sell these to strangers. Mason shrugged. Mom wants the garage cleared by Monday. We're putting in a home gym. The contractor needs the space empty. He gestured to the crowd of buyers. Besides, look at them. They love this old junk. We've made $3,000 in the last hour. Easy money. Junk? I felt the heat rising in my face. This is heritage. This is the only reason you have a roof over your head. Mason hopped off the car. He walked up to me, chewing gum loudly. Save the speech, Liam. You want the tools? Buy them. Cash. Just like everyone else. He looked at the plane in my hand. That one is, let's say, $100. Friends and family discount. I stared at him. He was enjoying this. He was selling my father's soul for pocket change, just to see me bleed. I reached for my wallet. I had $40 cash. I couldn't buy them. I couldn't save them all. I looked at the bins. Strangers were rummaging through them, tossing Arthur's precision instruments around like toys. I felt a wave of nausea. Then I saw it. Over by the dumpster, 2 men were hauling a large slab of wood. It was the Bubinga slab. It was a massive piece of African rosewood, 12 feet long, 3 inches thick. It had a deep, reddish-purple grain that shimmered like water. Arthur had bought it 15 years ago. He had been saving it. This is the spirit wood, Liam, he had told me. One day, we will make the dining table for your own house with this. It will be the center of your family. The men were dragging it across the asphalt. I could hear the wood screaming as it scraped against the stones. Stop! I roared. I ran over to them. Put it down! You're ruining the edge! The men stopped, looking annoyed. One of them wiped sweat from his forehead. We bought it, pal, the man said. Mason sold it to us. I turned to Mason. You sold the Bubinga? Do you have any idea what that is? Mason laughed. It's a big plank, heavy as hell. These guys are doing me a favor taking it away. What are you going to do with it? I asked the buyer. River table, the man said excitedly. We're gonna cut it down the middle, pour blue epoxy resin in between, maybe put some LED lights in it. It's gonna look sick in my man cave. I felt like I had been slapped. They were going to cut it. They were going to pour plastic into it. They were going to destroy 15 years of waiting for a trend that would die in 6 months. No, I said. You can't. It's a done deal, the man said, reaching for the slab again. How much? I asked. How much did you pay? $200, the man said. $200. Ideally, that slab was worth $4,000. I'll give you $300, I said. The man hesitated. He looked at his friend. $500, Mason interjected. I spun around. Mason was smiling. The price just went up, Mason said. Demand dictates supply, right? If Liam wants it that bad, it must be worth something. I looked at Mason. He knew I was broke. He knew exactly what he was doing. I don't have $500 on me, I said quietly. Too bad, Mason said. Take it away, boys. The men bent down to lift the slab. Wait! I pulled the watch out of my pocket. No, I didn't have the watch. I had pawned it. I patted my pockets desperately. I had nothing. Except the truck. I looked at my Ford pickup. It was my livelihood. It was how I moved materials. It was how I got to the workshop. The truck, I said. Mason raised an eyebrow. What? The truck, I pointed. It's a 2005 Ford F-150, new transmission. It's worth $2,000 easy. Take it, in exchange for the wood and the tools in those bins. The crowd had gone quiet. People were watching, the rich son and the beggar son, bargaining over scraps. Mason walked over to the truck. He kicked the tire. He looked at the rust around the wheel well. It's a piece of crap, Mason said. But I do need a vehicle to haul trash to the dump. The leather seats in the Range Rover are too nice for garbage. He held out his hand. Keys. I hesitated. If I gave him the truck, I was stranded. I would have to carry the wood. I would have to walk 5 miles back to the factory. But if I let them take the bubinga, if I let them pour plastic into Arthur's dream, I would never forgive myself. I pulled the keys out of my pocket. The metal was warm from my hand. I dropped them into Mason's palm. Pleasure doing business, Mason smirked. He tossed the keys to one of the valets. Park it round back. We'll use it for the landscaping crew. I turned to the 2 men holding the slab. It's mine, I said. Put it down. They shrugged and dropped the wood. It hit the ground with a heavy, resonant thud. I gathered the tools from the bins. I took off my jacket and wrapped the planes and chisels in it so they wouldn't bang together. I piled them on top of the wood slab. Then I stood there, looking at the massive piece of timber. It weighed at least 200 pounds. I was alone. I couldn't call a taxi for a 12-foot plank. I grabbed the end of the slab. I gritted my teeth. I lifted. The weight was crushing. It dug into my fingers. My back screamed. I started to drag it. Scrape, step, scrape, step. I dragged it down the driveway, past the staring crowd, past Mason, who was laughing with his friends, past the estate sale sign. I didn't look back. I just focused on the weight. The pain was good. It reminded me I was alive. It reminded me I was carrying something real. I dragged it for a mile. My hands were blistered. My shoulders felt like they were on fire. A light rain began to fall. I sat down on the edge of the slab, on the side of the public road, gasping for air. Cars whizzed by, splashing dirty water onto me. I was a fool. A sentimental fool with a piece of wood and no way to get it home. A grey car slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder ahead of me. The window rolled down. Need a lift? It was Jeremiah Vance. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say, I told you so. He popped the trunk of his Buick. It was too small for the wood. He got out. He was wearing his suit, but he didn't care about the rain. He opened the back door. Slide it in, he said. We let it hang out the window. I'll drive slow. Together, we wrestled the massive slab into the back seat of the luxury sedan. It stuck out 4 feet on either side. It looked ridiculous. I climbed into the passenger seat, wet, dirty, and shaking from exhaustion. Jeremiah started the car. He turned on the heater. "You traded the truck?" he asked softly. "I had to," I said. "They were going to make it into a river table." Jeremiah nodded solemnly. He understood. To him, the law was a structure, but to me, wood was the structure. We both respected the integrity of the material.
"You know," Jeremiah said, merging carefully into traffic, "Arthur once told me that a man is defined by what he refuses to sell." He glanced at me. "You passed the test, Liam." "There was a test?" I asked, rubbing my sore hands. "There is always a test," he said. "Mason thinks he is winning because he is accumulating cash. He doesn't understand that he is liquidating his own legitimacy." He paused at a red light. "The reading of the Codicil is in 3 days," he said. "The Codicil?" "The appendix to the will, the one Evelyn doesn't know about. I've scheduled the meeting, 9 a.m., Monday, at the house." "Why tell me now?" "Because," Jeremiah said, his eyes fixed on the road, "I needed to see if you were still the architect, or if you had become a demolition man like them." He tapped the steering wheel. "You saved the wood. That means you still believe in building things." We drove in silence for a while. "What happens on Monday?" I asked. "Monday is when the clock strikes," Jeremiah said cryptically. "But be warned, Liam. Evelyn will not go quietly. She has found discrepancies in the company books." "What kind of discrepancies?" "She claims Arthur was diverting funds, hidden accounts. She's building a case to invalidate any secret bequests he might have made. She's trying to prove he was mentally incompetent." My blood boiled. He was sharp as a tack until the morphine took over. "We know that," Jeremiah said. "But the court looks at paper, and she has a lot of paper." We arrived at the factory. Jeremiah helped me carry the wood inside. We set it down gently on the concrete floor, next to the half-finished skeleton of the timekeeper clock. The bobinga wood looked out of place in the grim warehouse. It glowed with a deep inner fire. It looked like royalty in exile. Jeremiah looked at the clock I was building. He studied the wooden gears, the escapement mechanism I had spent weeks carving. He adjusted his glasses. "That," he pointed to the clock, "is a Harrison escapement, grasshopper design. Very difficult." "It minimizes friction," I said. "No oil needed." Jeremiah smiled. A real, genuine smile. "No oil needed," he repeated. "Just truth and gravity." He turned to leave. "Get some rest, Liam. You look like hell. And wear a clean shirt on Monday. You're going to walk into the lion's den, and I want you to look like the tamer, not the meal." He left. I locked the rolling door. I was truckless. I was penniless. My hands were raw meat. But I had the spirit wood. And I had the tools. I picked up the Lion Nielsen plane I had rescued. I wiped the fingerprint of the stranger off the brass. I walked over to the bobinga slab. I ran the plane over the rough edge. Shh-k. A paper-thin shaving of dark red wood curled up. The smell of roses and spice filled the cold air. It was the smell of home. I wasn't broken. I was just stripped down to the grain. I looked at the clock. 3 days. I had 3 days to finish the mechanism. I had to prove that I wasn't just a scavenger. I had to prove that I was the one who kept time. I picked up the chisel. Tick, tock. The final push was a blur of caffeine and sawdust. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The timekeeper wasn't finished. It couldn't be finished in a month. But the heart of it was. The movement, the gears, the pendulum. I needed it to work, just once. I needed to bring something to that meeting. I couldn't walk in with empty hands. Evelyn would have spreadsheets. Mason would have bank statements. I would have a machine that proved Arthur's genius and my inheritance of it. It was Sunday night. The wind was howling outside, rattling the metal roof of the factory. I was assembling the final drivetrain. My phone rang. It was a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. Hello? Liam? It was Evelyn. Her voice was smooth, like velvet over broken glass. Evelyn? I said, not looking up from the gear I was spinning. To what do I owe the pleasure? I heard about your little scene at the estate sale, she said. Trading a truck for a piece of wood? Really, Liam, you're embarrassing yourself. I got what I wanted, I said. Did you? She paused. I'm calling to give you a heads up for Monday. How thoughtful. I'm offering you a settlement, she said. A one-time cash payment, $50,000. In exchange, you sign a waiver relinquishing all claims to the estate, present and future. And you don't show up tomorrow. I stopped working. 50,000. It was enough to rent a real shop. It was enough to buy a new truck. It was enough to start over properly. Why? I asked. If you've won, why offer me anything? Because I pity you, she said. And because I don't want a scene. We have investors coming. I want a clean break. You're scared, I realized. You talked to Jeremiah. You know about the Codicil. There was a silence on the line. There is no Codicil, she snapped. Just the ramblings of a dying man. But if you come tomorrow, Liam, I will destroy you. I will sue you for the theft of the sketchbook. I have the footage. I will bury you in legal fees until you are rotting in a debtor's prison. She took a breath. Take the money. Go away. Be a carpenter somewhere else. I looked at the clock mechanism. I looked at the bubinga wood. Evelyn, I said softly. What? You can keep the money. I'm coming for the truth. I hung up. My hand was trembling. She had the footage. She could have me arrested. But she had played her hand too early. She was afraid. And fear meant I had a chance. I turned back to the clock. I installed the pendulum. I attached the weight, a simple lead cylinder encased in the walnut I had saved. I gave the pendulum a gentle push. Click, tock, click, tock. The wooden gears began to turn. The grasshopper escapement kicked and released, kicked and released. It was silent, smooth, mesmerizing. It worked. It was the heartbeat of the wood. I sat back on my stool and watched it. Tomorrow, I would walk into the mansion. I would likely be arrested. I would likely lose everything. But tonight, the time was mine. Monday morning broke with the color of a bruise. The sky was a swollen purple-gray, threatening snow. I was up at 5 a.m. I hadn't really slept. I had spent the night polishing the brass fittings of the clock mechanism, checking the tension of the escapement spring for the 100th time. It sat in a wooden crate I had built for it, padded with velvet scraps I bought from a fabric store's discount bin. It was my witness. It was the only thing that could speak for me when I walked into that room. I dressed in my funeral suit. It was the only suit I had. I had brushed the sawdust off it, but the elbows were shiny with wear, and there was a faint smell of machine oil that no amount of cologne could mask. I buttoned the white shirt.
The collar felt tight, like a noose. I placed the sketchbook, Arthur's journal, into my inside pocket. It was bulky, pressing against my ribs. It felt like armor. I checked my reflection in the dark window of the factory. I looked tired. My eyes were hollow, rimmed with red. I didn't look like an heir. I looked like a ghost. "You ready, kid?" Sal was standing by the door. He had offered to drive me. He knew I had sold the truck. He didn't ask why. He just showed up with his battered delivery van, the engine idling with a sound like rocks in a blender. "Ready as I'll ever be," I said. I picked up the crate containing the clock mechanism. It was heavy, about 40 pounds of dense wood and brass. I walked toward the door. Then the world turned blue. Flashes of red and blue light strobed against the brick walls of the factory, cutting through the morning gloom. A siren chirped, once, sharp and authoritative. Sal cursed. "Cops." My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze. 2 police cruisers blocked the exit of the alley. Doors opened. Uniformed officers stepped out, their hands resting near their belts. "Liam Vance?" one of them shouted. He was a sergeant, broad-shouldered, with a face that had seen too many bad mornings. I stepped out onto the loading dock, still holding the crate. "That's me," I said. My voice sounded steady, but my knees felt like water. "Please step down and keep your hands visible," the sergeant said. "I'm heading to a legal meeting," I said, walking down the concrete steps slowly. "Is there a problem?" "We have a warrant," the sergeant said, pulling a folded paper from his vest. "Complaint filed by Evelyn Vance, grand larceny, theft of estate property." He looked me up and down. "Specifically, an antique leather-bound journal containing proprietary designs, valued at $50,000. The air left my lungs. She had done it. She wasn't bluffing. "That journal was a gift," I said. "My father gave it to me." "Does the will say that?" the sergeant asked. "Because the executor says it's missing from the inventory, and security footage shows you removing it from the premises on the night of the funeral." He stepped closer. "Do you have it on you, son?" I felt the weight of the book against my chest. It was burning a hole through my suit. If I gave it up, I lost the blueprints. I lost the proof of Arthur's intent. I lost the notes that explained the philosophy of the company. If I didn't give it up, they would arrest me. They would cuff me, put me in the back of the car, and I would miss the 9 a.m. meeting. Evelyn would win by default. I looked at Sal. He shook his head helplessly. I looked at the crate in my hands, the clock, the physical proof. "I have a meeting," I pleaded. "At the Vance estate. The lawyers are waiting. If I miss this, I lose everything. Can I just go there first?" "This isn't a taxi service," the sergeant said sternly. "This is a criminal investigation. Hand over the property or I take you in." I closed my eyes. Arthur always said, "The plan is not the product. The paper is just a promise. The wood is the truth." I had to trust the wood. I set the crate down on the wet asphalt. I reached into my jacket. The officers tensed, hands moving to their holsters. I pulled out the black book. "Here," I said. My voice cracked. The sergeant took it. He flipped it open, checking the pages. He saw the drawings. "This looks like the item described," he said. He bagged it in a clear plastic evidence bag. Seeing it behind plastic, treated like a stolen stereo, broke something inside me. That book held the sketch of the birdhouse we built when I was 8. It held the design for my mother's rocking chair. "Am I under arrest?" I asked. The sergeant looked at the warrant, then at his watch. He looked at my cheap suit and the desperate look in my eyes. "Technically, I should haul you in," he said. He paused. "But the warrant says confiscate and report. It doesn't explicitly say detain immediately if cooperation is voluntary." He looked at me. He saw I wasn't a criminal. He saw a guy who was having the worst day of his life. "You got somewhere to be?" he asked. "The mansion," I said, "to face her." The sergeant nodded. He handed me a citation. "Court date is next month. Don't leave town. And don't go near that lady unless your lawyer is present." He turned to his partner. "Let's go." They got back in their cars. The blue lights died. They drove away, taking my father's mind with them. I stood there in the cold. I felt lighter, but it was a terrible lightness. I felt hollowed out. Sal drove the van up next to me. "Get in," Sal said gently. "We can still make it." I picked up the crate. It was all I had left. The drive took 40 minutes. The snow had started to fall. Wet, heavy flakes that turned to slush the moment they hit the road. Sal stopped at the main gate of the Vance estate. The iron gates were closed. A security guard, new, private security, not the old gatekeeper I knew, stepped out of the booth. "Name?" he barked. "Liam Vance," I said from the passenger window. The guard checked a list. He frowned. "I have Liam Vance on the do not admit list," he said. "Strict orders from Mrs. Vance. No vehicles." "I have a meeting," I shouted. "Jeremiah Vance is expecting me." "Mr. Jeremiah Vance is already inside," the guard said. "But my orders are clear. No unauthorized vehicles." He looked at the van. It was leaking oil onto the pristine driveway. "Walk," the guard said, pointing to the pedestrian side gate. "You can walk up, but the van stays here." The driveway was a mile long. It was uphill. It was snowing. "Thanks," I muttered. I got out. I hauled the crate out of the back. "I'll wait here," Sal said. "Good luck, kid. Give him hell." I nodded and turned toward the house. The walk was a nightmare. The wind whipped through the bare trees, stinging my face. The crate was heavy, the corners digging into my palms. My dress shoes slipped on the wet asphalt. Every step was a battle. My arms burned. My shoulders screamed. I thought about turning back. It would be so easy. Just turn around, get in the van and disappear. I could go to another city. I could change my name. I could be a carpenter anywhere. Why was I fighting for a house where I was treated like a servant? Why was I fighting for a name that wasn't even mine by blood? Because he asked me to. Because he gave me the stones. Because of the puzzle piece. I kept walking. I saw the house looming at the top of the hill. It looked like a fortress. The windows were dark, except for the library on the ground floor. The lights were on. I could see silhouettes moving inside. I reached the front steps. I was gasping for air. My suit was soaked. My hair was plastered to my skull. I didn't knock. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. They swung inward with a groan. The butler, a man named Charles who had always been kind to me, was standing in the foyer. He looked shocked. "Master Liam," he whispered. "You're wet." "I'm here for the meeting, Charles," I said, setting the crate down on the marble floor with a thud. "They are in the library," Charles said. "They have just started." I took a deep breath. I wiped the rain from my face. I picked up the crate again. I walked to the library doors. They were closed. I could hear Evelyn's voice inside. It was smooth, confident, lecturing. I kicked the doors open. The room went silent. It was a tableau of power. Evelyn sat at the head of the long mahogany table. She was wearing a white suit, looking like an ice queen. Mason sat to her right, playing with a gold pen. On the other side sat 3 lawyers in expensive grey suits. Evelyn's team. And at the far end, looking small and rumpled, sat Jeremiah Vance. Everyone turned to look at me. I must have looked like a maniac. Soaked to the bone, shivering, holding a wooden box like it was a bomb. "Liam," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I see security failed to do their job. Or did you swim across the moat?" Mason snickered. "I'm here," I said, my voice raspy. "I'm on time." I walked to the table. I didn't sit. I placed the crate on the polished surface. I didn't care if it scratched the varnish. "You're late," Evelyn said, checking her diamond watch. "And you're trespassing. I believe the police have already spoken to you about your thievery." "They took the book," I said. A flicker of triumph crossed her face. "Good. Then we have recovered the stolen property. That simplifies things." She turned to the lawyers. "Gentlemen, as I was saying, since Mr. Liam has no documentation, no legal standing, and apparently no respect for dress codes, I move that we conclude this farce. The estate is solvent. The heirs are present. The codicil Mr. Jeremiah refers to is clearly a fabrication or a misunderstanding of a senile man." One of the grey suits nodded. "Without corroborating evidence of a specific bequest, the default statutes of inheritance apply. The stepson has no claim." Jeremiah cleared his throat. "Arthur was very specific about the presence codicil. The estate goes to the one who was present," Evelyn interrupted. "I was his wife. I lived here. I was present." "You were in Milan," I said, "when he was diagnosed." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I was managing the brand. That is part of the marriage partnership." "You were in the Hamptons," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "when he had his first surgery. You were at a spa in Switzerland when he went into hospice." "Stop it," Evelyn hissed. "How dare you measure my grief? You were just the nurse, the help. That doesn't make you the owner." She stood up, slamming her hand on the table. "You have nothing, Liam. No blood, no paper, no book. You are a fraud holding a box of scraps." She pointed at the door. "Get out, before I call the police back to finish what they started." The room felt incredibly small. The walls of books Arthur had read, books he had loved, seemed to be closing in. I looked at Jeremiah. He didn't speak. He just looked at the box. He was waiting. I looked at Mason. He was grinning, enjoying the show. I looked at Evelyn. She was right. I had no paper. I reached for the latch on the crate. "I don't have the book," I said quietly. I undid the metal clasps. Click, click. And I don't have the blood. I opened the lid. The smell of oil and cedar wafted out into the sterile room. But Arthur didn't believe in paper, and he didn't care about blood. I lifted the mechanism out. It was a skeleton of wood, complex, beautiful, fragile yet strong. The gears were dark rosewood. The frame was ash. The escapement was lignum vitae. I set it down on the table. "He believed in function," I said. "He believed that if you build it true, it works." Evelyn looked at the machine with confusion. "What is that? A toy?" "It's a clock," I said. "The Harrison grasshopper design. He tried to build it for 20 years. He never could. He said the friction was always too high. He said the wood moved too much." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pendulum bob, the piece of walnut I had saved. I hooked it onto the suspension spring. He told me that whoever could finish this understood his heart. I looked at Evelyn. You want the company? You want the legacy? Can you make it run? I slid the machine towards her. Start it. Evelyn stared at the wooden gears. She didn't know where to touch it. She didn't know the difference between the escape wheel and the pallet. She looked at it like it was an alien artifact. This is ridiculous, she scoffed. I don't play with toys. It's not a toy, Jeremiah said softly. It's the test. He pulled a document from his briefcase. A single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. I have here a sealed letter Arthur gave me 5 years ago. It references a specific object, the timekeeper. Jeremiah read from the paper. My estate shall pass to the one who can make the timekeeper sing. For only patience and truth can make it run. If it stands still, the house goes to Evelyn. If it runs, it goes to the builder. The room went deathly quiet. Even the lawyers stopped shuffling their papers. Evelyn's face went pale. That's absurd. A riddle? In a will? It's a condition of performance, the lead lawyer said, looking interested for the first time. Unusual, but legal. If the testator set a specific challenge, Evelyn glared at the lawyer. Then she looked at the machine. Then she looked at Mason. Mason, she snapped, start the damn thing. Mason stood up. He walked over to the mechanism. He looked at it. He reached out and shoved the pendulum hard. The gears spun wildly. Whirr, clack! The wooden teeth skipped. The pendulum swung too wide, hit the frame, and bounced back with a sickening crunch. The motion stopped dead in 2 seconds. Silence. Mason shrugged. It's broken. It's junk. Just like I said. See? Evelyn said, regaining her composure. It doesn't work. The condition is failed. The estate is mine. She smiled. A cold, victorious smile. Nice try, Liam, but you're not a genius. You're just a carpenter. My heart sank. Mason had shoved it too hard. He might have misaligned the pallets. I stepped forward. It's not broken, I said. It just rejects force. I stood over the machine. I closed my eyes for a second. I thought about the cold nights in the factory. I thought about the $30 chair repairs. I thought about the smell of sawdust. I reached out. My hands were shaking, but as soon as I touched the wood, they steadied. I reset the escapement. I checked the friction. I didn't push the pendulum. I breathed on it. A gentle, steady breath. Then, I gave it the slightest touch. A whisper of a touch. Click. The escape wheel advanced 1 tooth. Tock. The pallet released. Click. Tock. Click. Tock. The rhythm established itself. Slow, steady, like a heartbeat. The wooden gears meshed perfectly, rolling over each other without a sound, except for the rhythmic percussion of time passing. The room held its breath. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. A minute. The machine kept running. It was a perpetual motion of geometry and grace. I looked up. Jeremiah was smiling. He placed the paper on the table. It sings, he whispered. I looked at Evelyn. Her smile was gone. Her face was a mask of pure shock. The sound of the clicking wood seemed to be driving a nail into her confidence, second by second. Click. Tock. I had nothing in my pockets. No money, no truck, no home. But the clock was running. And for the first time in months, I wasn't just the boy in the corner. I was the master architect. Click, Tock, click, tock. The sound was small, but it filled the library like a thunderclap. It was the only sound in the world. I stood back from the table, my hands covered in the invisible oil of the wood. The timekeeper was running. The intricate wooden gears, dark rosewood against pale ash, were moving in a hypnotic dance. The pendulum swung with a lazy, confident rhythm, slicing through the tension in the room. Evelyn was staring at it. Her mouth was slightly open. The mask of the grieving widow had slipped, replaced by the raw, ugly face of panic. Mason had slumped back in his chair. He looked from the clock to me, then to his mother. He looked like a child who had just realized the game was not make-believe. "Stop it," Evelyn whispered. "Stop that noise." She reached out, her hand hovering over the pendulum, wanting to grab it, to choke the life out of the machine. "I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Vance," Jeremiah said. His voice was no longer the gravelly mumble of an old man. It was sharp. It was the voice of a man who had argued before the Supreme Court. He stood up. He didn't look frail anymore. He looked dangerous. "Touching the device now would be considered tampering with evidence during a legal proceeding," Jeremiah warned. "And I believe you are already in enough trouble." Evelyn retracted her hand as if burned. She turned her fury on him. "Evidence?" she spat. "This is a stunt. It's a magic trick performed by a carpenter. You cannot base the transfer of $100 million estate on a wooden toy." She turned to her lead lawyer, a man named Sterling who charged $1,000 an hour. "Sterling, tell him. Tell him this is insanity. Tell him that the law doesn't care about clocks." Sterling adjusted his glasses. He looked at the clock, then at the yellow document Jeremiah had placed on the table. He picked up the paper with a trembling hand. "Actually, Evelyn," Sterling said slowly, reading the text, "the law cares very much about the testator's intent. This isn't just a riddle. It's a conditional bequest, a condition precedent." He looked at me with a new expression. Respect? Fear? "Mr. Arthur Vance was of sound mind when he wrote this," Sterling continued. "He established a specific test of competency for his successor. He defined the builder as the one who could complete his unfinished work." "But he has no standing!" Evelyn screamed. Her voice cracked, losing its polished veneer. "He is not family. He is a stray cat Arthur fed. He has no blood relation to the Vance line." This was the moment. The line I had heard 1,000 times. The weapon she had used to cut me out of photos, out of dinners, out of my father's life. Not real family. I started to speak, to defend myself, but Jeremiah raised a hand. He stepped forward, placing himself between Evelyn and me. "That," Jeremiah said quietly, "is where you are incorrect, madam." He opened his briefcase. It clicked loudly, echoing the clock. He pulled out a thick leather binder. It wasn't the sketchbook I had stolen. It was something else. A medical log. "For the last 6 months of Arthur's life," Jeremiah began, addressing the room like a courtroom, "I was not just his lawyer. I was his witness." He opened the binder. "You claim Liam is not family because of biology," Jeremiah said. "But Arthur anticipated this. He knew you would rely on DNA. He knew you would rely on the marriage certificate." Jeremiah slid the binder down the table toward Evelyn. So, he redefined the terms. Evelyn looked down at the open page. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "This," Jeremiah said, "is the presence log. It documents every visitor, every hour, every minute spent at Arthur's bedside during his decline. It was verified by the nursing staff and recorded by the security cameras you so thoughtfully installed. Jeremiah pointed to a column of numbers. Total hours spent by Evelyn Vance in the last 100 days, 14. Mostly during press opportunities. He pointed to the next column. Total hours spent by Mason Vance, 3. And according to the notes, 2 of those were spent asking for a signature on a check. Mason shrank into his chair, avoiding eye contact. Jeremiah turned the page. Total hours spent by Liam Vance, 840. The room went silent again. Only the click-tock of the clock filled the air. Liam changed the sheets, Jeremiah recited, his voice gaining power. Liam administered the morphine when the nurses were late. Liam read aloud to him when his eyes failed. Liam slept in the chair. Jeremiah looked straight at Evelyn. In the eyes of the law, a spouse implies a consortium of care, a partnership. You abandoned that partnership, Evelyn. You were absent. He pulled another document from the briefcase, a blue folder. And this, Jeremiah said, is the final amendment to the will, the true family clause. He read aloud. I, Arthur Vance, being of sound mind, do hereby declare that the definition of my heir shall not be determined by blood, which is an accident of birth, but by devotion, which is a choice of will. The one who stands by me when the lights fade is my son. The one who builds when others destroy is my successor. Jeremiah slammed the folder shut. So to correct your earlier statement, Mrs. Vance, Liam is the only real family in this room. You are merely a legal technicality, and a technicality that has just expired. Evelyn's face turned a shade of grey I had never seen before. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. You can't do this, she stammered. I have rights. I have the widow's share. I have the prenuptial agreement. Ah, yes, Jeremiah smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. The prenup. He turned to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I believe you reviewed the assets this morning? You noted that the timber reserves have been sold, the tool collection liquidated, the classic cars auctioned? Yes, Sterling said cautiously. Mrs. Vance authorized the liquidation to cover estate debts. There were no estate debts, Jeremiah said simply. Arthur had a $10 million life insurance policy intended to cover all taxes. The estate was solvent. Evelyn froze. What? She whispered. Arthur hid nothing from me, Jeremiah said. The insurance policy was active. But by liquidating assets before probate was closed and without necessity, you have committed waste of estate assets. It's a breach of your fiduciary duty as executor. Jeremiah leaned in close to her. In layman's terms, Evelyn, you sold things that didn't belong to you yet. That's theft. And because you violated the prenup's clause regarding the preservation of the estate, the prenup is void. Evelyn collapsed into her chair. It wasn't a graceful faint. It was the physical crumbling of a person who realizes the ground has vanished beneath them. No, she moaned. Mason, tell them. Mason looked at his mother. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the door. I didn't sign the sale orders, Mason said quickly. That was all her. I just drove the car. Evelyn stared at her son. The betrayal was absolute. You coward, she hissed. I watched them. I felt a strange sensation. I expected to feel joy. I expected to feel the rush of victory. But I didn't. I just felt tired. and sad. They were eating each other. As soon as the money was threatened, the blood bond they talked so much about evaporated. I walked over to the table. I placed my hand on the wooden frame of the clock. It was warm. "I don't want to see you in prison, Evelyn," I said softly. She looked up at me, her eyes wet with angry tears. "Don't you dare pity me." "I don't pity you," I said. "I pity the fact that you lived in this house for 10 years and never understood what it was." I looked at Sterling and the other lawyers. "What happens now?" I asked. Sterling cleared his throat. He closed his folder and pushed it away from him, distancing himself from Evelyn. "Mr. Vance," Sterling said, and this time he meant me. "Effective immediately, we will file a motion to remove Evelyn as executor. Control of the assets, the properties, and the company transfers to you. We will need to freeze the accounts again to audit the damage she caused." He paused. "However, she will be liable for the value of the items already sold. The timber, the tools, the cars. That will come out of her personal assets." Jeremiah nodded. "She leaves with what she came with, which, if I recall, was a suitcase of designer shoes and a very aggressive ambition." Evelyn stood up. She was shaking. She gathered her purse. "This isn't over," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "I will fight this. I will drag you through every court in the country." "You can try," Jeremiah said calmly. "But you'll be doing it with a public defender. Because I don't think you can afford Mr. Sterling anymore." Sterling nodded slightly. "My firm requires a retainer, Evelyn, and your credit cards are currently under review." Evelyn looked around the room. The library she had tried to modernize, the books she had never read, the stepson she had tried to erase. She turned and walked out. Her heels clicked on the floor, but the sound was different now. It wasn't the sound of authority. It was the sound of a retreat. Mason hesitated. He looked at me, putting on his best charming smile, the one he used to get out of speeding tickets. "Liam, bro," he started. "Look, about the truck and the tools, it was just business, you know? Mom, she's crazy. But us? We're brothers, right?" I looked at him. I remembered him mocking me at the funeral. I remembered him selling the bubinga wood for a river table. "We're not brothers, Mason," I said. "We just lived in the same house." I pointed to the door. "Go." Mason's smile vanished. He sneered one last time, muttered something about "lucky bastard," and ran after his mother. The heavy oak doors slammed shut. The silence returned. But it wasn't empty silence. It was filled with the click-tock of the timekeeper. I sat down in the chair Evelyn had vacated. I felt the weight of the last month crashing down on me. Jeremiah sat down opposite me. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were twinkling. "Well," Jeremiah said, pulling a flask from his jacket pocket. "That went well." He offered it to me. "It's brandy," he said. "Arthur's private stock." I took a sip. It burned, then warmed me all the way to my toes. "Did you really know?" I asked. "About the clock? Did you know I could build it?" "I knew you were the only one who would try," Jeremiah said. "Arthur told me, Mason will try to sell it. Evelyn will try to hire someone to fix it. Only Liam will sit down and listen to it." He gestured to the machine. "You listened, Liam." I looked at the clock. I thought about the people who wanted things fixed, not just replaced. "Let them pull the money," I said. Jeremiah raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "Let the investors go," I turned back to him. "I don't want their money. I don't want to build lifestyle solutions. I want to build furniture." "You'll be bankrupt in a month," Jeremiah warned. "The overhead on this estate alone is $50,000 a month." Then we sell the estate, I said. Jeremiah choked on his brandy. Sell the house? The museum? Evelyn fought tooth and nail for this pile of stones. It's just a house, I said. It's not the home. The home was the workshop. And she destroyed that. I looked at the clock again. Dad didn't leave me the house to live in, I realized. He left me the house so I could use it. I formulated the plan in my head. It was crazy. It was risky. But it was honest. We sell the mansion, I said firmly. We take the money, we pay off the debts, and we buy back the old textile factory where I've been staying. The dump? Jeremiah asked, horrified. The factory, I corrected. It has good bones. It has space. We hire the old crew back, the craftsmen Evelyn fired. We start small. We build the timekeeper line, limited edition, handmade. Jeremiah looked at me for a long time. He studied my face, looking for the scared boy who used to hide in the garage. He didn't find him. He smiled. Arthur was right, he muttered. About what? He said you were stubborn. He said you were a tree that grew through concrete. Jeremiah closed his briefcase. I'll draft the paperwork. But Liam, there is one thing left. What? The police, Jeremiah said. They still have the sketchbook. And technically, the charge of grand larceny is still on the books until Evelyn formally drops it. Since she is no longer the executor, you have to drop the charges against yourself. I laughed. It was a dry, weary laugh. I have to forgive myself? Legally, yes, Jeremiah grinned. But metaphorically, I think you already have. I touched the sketchbook in my mind, the designs, the future. Come on, Mr. Vance, I said, picking up the crate with the clock. Let's go to the station. I want my book back. And then? And then, I said, looking out at the snow-covered world that was suddenly wide open. We go to work. I walked out of the library. The butler, Charles, was standing by the door. He was holding a towel. For the rain, sir, he said. Thanks, Charles, I said. You might want to start packing. We're moving. Moving, sir? Where to? Somewhere with more sawdust, I said. Charles smiled. A genuine, relieved smile. That sounds wonderful, sir. I stepped out into the cold air, but this time, I wasn't shivering. I had the clock. I had the truth. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I wasn't the stepson. I wasn't the charity case. I was the builder. The police station smelled of stale coffee and floor wax, a scent that was strangely comforting after the perfumed suffocation of the library. The sergeant, Sergeant Miller, I learned his name was, slid the plastic evidence bag across the metal counter. Inside sat the black leather sketchbook. You're lucky, kid, Miller said, leaning back in his chair. Mrs. Vance called 10 minutes ago. Her lawyer said to drop all charges. Said it was a misunderstanding regarding family property. I picked up the bag. I didn't open it yet. I just held it. It felt heavier than before, weighted down by the close call. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. It was a leverage play. Well, she folded, Miller grunted. But take a piece of advice. If you're going to be swimming with sharks like that, buy a bigger boat. I smiled, a genuine, tired smile. I'm not buying a boat, Sergeant. I'm building a lighthouse. I walked out of the station. The snow had stopped, leaving the city covered in a clean, white blanket. The air was sharp and clear. Jeremiah was waiting in his Buick, the engine puffing white exhaust plumes. Where to? He asked as I climbed in. The mansion? To measure the drapes? No, I said.
We have a stop to make first. The pawn shop. Jeremiah raised a bushy eyebrow but didn't argue. He put the car in gear. Rick, the pawn shop owner, looked up from his magazine when the door chime rang. He saw me. Then he saw the suit. Dried now, but still wrinkled. And then he saw the old man in the expensive coat behind me. "Well, well," Rick said, chewing on his toothpick. "The prodigal son returns. And he brought a lawyer. Am I being sued?" "No, Rick," I said, walking up to the glass counter. "I'm here to close a deal." I placed the receipt on the counter. "I want the watch back." Rick looked at the receipt, then at the calendar on the wall. "It's been 3 weeks. You got 90 days. You in a rush?" "I am," I said. Jeremiah stepped forward. He pulled a checkbook from his pocket. "How much to release the lien immediately?" Rick looked at Jeremiah's pen, a Mont Blanc that cost more than the register. He smirked. The deal was 9,000 principal plus 20% interest. That's 10,800. Jeremiah began to write. "Wait," I said. I put my hand on Jeremiah's arm. "No checks, not from the estate." I looked at Rick. "I don't have the cash on me, Rick, but I have the title to a 2018 Mercedes-Benz S-Class. It's parked at the Vance estate. It was Arthur's town car. It's worth 60,000 easy." Rick's eyes widened. "You trading a Benz for a watch?" "I'm trading a car I don't need for a memory I can't lose," I said. "Straight swap. You take the car, you give me the watch, and you keep the 9 grand I already took. That's a $50,000 profit for you." Rick whistled low. "You serious?" "Dead serious. Call it a bonus for not selling it early." Rick didn't hesitate. He unlocked the safe. He pulled out the Patek Philippe. He handed it to me. I held it. The rose gold was cold. I turned it over. The inscription on the back was still there. "Time tells the truth." I put it on my wrist. I fastened the clasp. Click. It felt like locking a piece of my soul back into place. "Pleasure doing business," Rick said, tossing me the keys to his beat-up shop van so we could go get the Mercedes. "You're crazy, kid, but you got style." I walked out into the sunlight. I checked the time. 11:45 a.m. "You just gave away a luxury car," Jeremiah noted dryly as we walked. "Evelyn would have had a stroke." "Evelyn isn't the executor anymore," I said. "And besides, I'm a truck guy." The next week was a blur of controlled chaos. We listed the mansion. The real estate market was hungry for trophy properties, and the Vance estate was the biggest trophy in the city. Jeremiah handled the sharks. He found a buyer in 3 days, a tech billionaire from Silicon Valley who wanted a historic East Coast retreat. The price was astronomical, $32 million. It was enough. It was enough to pay off the immediate debts Evelyn had accrued. It was enough to settle the severance packages for the household staff we couldn't keep. And it was enough to fund the resurrection. On the final day before the handover, I stood in the main hall of the mansion. It was empty. The movers had taken the furniture Evelyn hadn't sold. The art was gone. The echoes were loud. I walked through the rooms. The dining room, where I was told I wasn't family. The library, where I proved I was. I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no sadness. Arthur was right. This place was a museum. It was a mausoleum for a success he felt trapped by. I walked out the back door to the carriage house, my old workshop. It was stripped bare. The shelves were empty, but the smell of cedar was still faint in the walls. "Goodbye," I whispered. I locked the door.
I left the keys under the mat for the new owner.
I got into my new truck, a used white Ford F-250, sturdy and reliable, no rust. I drove away from the hill. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove straight to the industrial district, to the old textile factory. But this time, I wasn't renting a corner from Sal. I was buying the building. Sal met me at the gate. He was wearing a suit, or what he considered a suit, which was a sports coat over a tracksuit. "You sure about this, Liam?" Sal asked, handing me the deed. "This place is a dump. The roof leaks, the pipes rattle." "It has good bones, Sal," I said, signing the papers on the hood of my truck. "And the light is good." "Well, you're the boss now," Sal grinned, checking the cashier's check I handed him. "Landlord and tenant, moving up in the world." I walked into the factory. It was vast, empty, cold. But in my mind, I saw it. I saw the milling station in the east wing. I saw the assembly benches in the center, under the skylights. I saw the finishing room in the back, ventilated and dust-free. I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. "Hello?" A gruff voice answered. "Elias?" I said. There was a pause. "Liam? Is that you?" Elias Thorne. He had been the foreman of the Vance workshop for 20 years, Arthur's right hand. Evelyn had fired him the day after the funeral, saying he was too old and too expensive. "It's me, Elias," I said. "How's retirement?" "Boring," Elias grumbled. "I'm building birdhouses for the grandkids. They have too many birdhouses. The birds are filing complaints about overcrowding." I laughed. "How would you like to get back to the real work?" "Work?" Elias asked, his tone shifting. "For who? That witch?" "No," I said. "For Vance Handcrafted, the real one." I explained the plan. The sale of the mansion. The new factory. The return to the old ways. "I can't pay you what you were making before," I admitted. "Not yet. But I can give you equity. I can give you a key. And I can promise you we'll never use particle board." I heard a sound on the other end. The sound of a chair scraping back. "When do we start?" Elias asked. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Bring your tools." "And Elias? Call the boys. Marcus, Sam, old Henry, call them all." "They're scattered, Liam. Some took jobs at the mill, some are driving Uber." "Tell them the sawdust is flying again," I said. "Tell them Arthur is back." "No," Elias said softly. "I'll tell them Liam is calling." I arrived at 6:30 a.m. I unlocked the rolling door of the factory. I turned on the lights. They buzzed and flickered, then bathed the concrete floor in a harsh yellow glow. I set up a coffee maker on a folding table. I put out a box of donuts. I waited. At 6:45, a car pulled up. Then another, then a truck. Elias walked in first. He looked older than I remembered, his hair completely white. But he carried his toolbox with the same easy strength. Behind him came Marcus, the master finisher. Then Sam, the joiner. Then Henry, who could carve a rose out of a block of oak with a pocket knife. There were 8 of them, the old guard. The men Evelyn had discarded like sawdust. They looked around the empty, dirty factory. It was a far cry from the heated, pristine workshop at the estate. "It's a bit rustic," Marcus noted, kicking a loose piece of concrete. "It's a blank slate," I said, stepping forward. I looked at them. These were the men who had taught me how to hold a hammer. These were my uncles, in everything but blood. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I know it doesn't look like much, but we have orders." I held up the notebook, Arthur's sketchbook. I have the designs for the timekeeper line. Limited run, 50 pieces. We have a waiting list of buyers who heard about the demonstration at the reading of the will. Word traveled fast in high society. The story of the magic clock had leaked. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the legend. But we need to build the shop first, I said. We need benches, we need jigs, we need to fix the roof. Elias set his toolbox down on the folding table. He opened a donut. Well, Elias chewed thoughtfully. I brought my drill. Who's got the lumber? For the next 10 hours, we didn't build furniture. We built the company. We framed walls, we hung lights, we swept decades of dust out the back door. The sound of laughter, rough, loud, honest laughter, filled the space. It was the best day of my life. Late in the afternoon, the sun was slanting through the high windows, turning the dust motes into gold. I was sweeping the loading dock when a car pulled up. It wasn't a luxury sedan. It was a beat-up Honda Civic. The driver's door opened, and Mason stepped out. He looked different. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt. He looked smaller, unshaven. He walked up to the dock, his hands in his pockets. He didn't have that arrogant swagger anymore. He walked like a man who had nowhere else to go. The crew inside went silent. Elias stepped into the doorway, holding a hammer, his eyes narrowing. I waved Elias back. It's okay. I walked to the edge of the dock. Mason, I said. Liam, he nodded. He looked at the factory. Nice place. Big. It's a start, I said. What do you want? Is Evelyn in the car? No, Mason shook his head. She's in a hotel. She's meeting with bankruptcy lawyers. She's blaming everyone. Me, you, the lawyers, the weather. He kicked at a pebble. She wants me to sue you, Mason said quietly. She says we can claim duress. She says we can get the house back. And are you going to? I asked. Mason looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. No, he said. I'm done, Liam. I'm done with the lawyers. I'm done with the schemes. I'm tired. He looked at his hands. They were soft, manicured hands. Useless hands. I have nothing, he said. She spent my trust fund. The creditors took the Ferrari this morning. I don't even have a place to sleep tonight. He looked at me, a flicker of the old desperation returning. I was hoping, since I didn't contest the will, maybe you could cut me a check? Just a small one, to get me on my feet. 10 grand, 5. I looked at him. I saw the entitlement still lurking there, buried under the fear. He still thought money was the solution. He still thought family was an ATM. I could give him the money. It would be easy. It would be hush money to make him go away. But Arthur wouldn't do that. Arthur didn't believe in handouts. He believed in tools. No, I said. Mason's shoulders slumped. Right, okay, I get it. Revenge. I deserve it. He turned to walk back to his car. Mason, I called out. He stopped. I won't give you money, I said, but I will give you a job. Mason turned around, confused. A job? Here? Yes, I said. We need someone to sweep the floors. We need someone to stack the lumber. We need someone to sand the rough edges. It pays $15 an hour, minimum wage. Mason stared at me. You want me to be a janitor? I want you to be useful, I said. You never worked a day in your life, Mason. You never earned $1. That's why you're empty. That's why you're scared. I pointed to the broom leaning against the wall. Start at the bottom. Learn the wood. Learn what Dad actually did. If you show up on time, if you work hard, if you don't complain, in 6 months, maybe I'll let you touch a saw. The crew was watching.
Elias was crossing his arms, skeptical. Mason looked at the broom. Then he looked at his Honda. Then he looked at the cold, grey sky. He had a choice. He could leave, keep chasing the illusion of his mother's world, and likely end up in jail or on the street. Or he could swallow his pride and pick up the broom. He walked slowly up the stairs of the dock. He stood in front of me. 15 an hour? He asked weakly. And overtime if you stay late, I said. Mason took a deep breath. He reached out and grabbed the broom. It was awkward in his hands. He held it like a golf club. You hold it lower, I corrected, adjusting his grip. Use your leverage, not your back. Mason looked at me. For the first time, there was no mockery in his eyes, just a strange, quiet relief. Okay, he whispered. Okay. He turned and started to sweep the sawdust near the door. It was clumsy, it was slow, but he was doing it. Elias walked up to me. You're a better man than me, Liam, Elias muttered. I would have thrown him in the chipper. He's not wood, Elias, I said, watching Mason work. He's just a broken piece. We fix broken things here. Does that mean he's family? Elias asked. Not yet, I said, but he's an applicant. I turned back to the factory floor. The lights were humming. The smell of pine and oak was rising. The sound of hammers and saws began to find a rhythm. It wasn't the sound of a clock anymore. It was the sound of a heartbeat. A big, loud, messy, collective heartbeat. I walked over to the main bench. I opened the sketchbook to the page marked Future. It was a sketch of a dining table. The one Arthur wanted to build with the Bubinga slab, the spirit wood. I looked at the massive slab leaning against the wall, safe and whole. Okay, Dad, I whispered. Let's build the table. I picked up my hand plane. I was ready to begin. 6 months later, the factory didn't smell like a factory anymore. It smelled like a forest after a rainstorm. It smelled of shaved oak, sanded cherry, and the sweet, spicy scent of the Bubinga wood. Summer had come to the industrial district. The rolling doors were open, letting the warm breeze mix with the hum of the machines. I stood on the catwalk overlooking the floor. It was alive. Down below, 12 workbenches were occupied. Elias was teaching a new apprentice how to sharpen a chisel. Marcus was applying shellac to a cabinet, his arm moving in slow, meditative circles. And in the corner by the sweep station was Mason. He looked different. He had lost 20 pounds. His face was tanned, not from a salon, but from walking to work. He was wearing a canvas apron covered in dust. He wasn't checking his phone. He was organizing the scrap bin, sorting the offcuts by species and size. He wasn't a master carpenter. He probably never would be. He lacked the innate patience. But he was a damn good shop assistant. He showed up early. He made the coffee. And he hadn't complained in 3 months. I walked down the metal stairs. My boots clanged on the steps, the rhythm of the captain walking his ship. I approached the center of the room. There it stood, the project, the Bubinga table. It was finished. 12 feet long, a single massive slab of African rosewood, butterfly keyed with ebony to stabilize the natural cracks. We hadn't cut it. We hadn't poured plastic into it. We had sanded it to 3000 grit until the wood felt like warm glass. It shimmered with a deep holographic red, looking more like a frozen river of wine than timber. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever built. It's too nice to eat on, Elias said, walking up beside me. We should put a velvet rope around it. No, I said, running my hand over the edge. Tables are for elbows. Tables are for spills. Tables are for life.
If we don't use it, it's just a coffin for a tree. I looked at the clock on the wall, not the timekeeper, which was safely locked in my office, but a standard shop clock. It's 6 p.m., I announced, my voice echoing through the hall. Tools down. The hum of the saws died away. The sanding stopped. The crew looked up. Tonight is a special night, I said. We just shipped the 50th timekeeper clock. We are officially in the black. A cheer went up, a rough, hearty sound. So, I continued, I ordered pizza, and we are breaking in the table. 10 minutes later, the massive slab was covered in cardboard pizza boxes, 6 packs of cheap beer and paper plates. It was a sacrilege to the fine furniture world, and it was perfect. We sat around it. Elias, Marcus, Sam, the new apprentices, and Mason. Mason hovered at the edge, holding a slice of pepperoni, unsure if he was allowed to sit. In Act 1, he had sat at the head of the table and laughed while I was sent to the kitchen. I pulled out the chair next to me. Mason, I said, sit. He looked at me surprised. Are you sure? I'm covered in dust. We're all covered in dust, I said. Sit down. He sat. He took a bite of pizza. He looked around the table at the men he used to look down on. They were laughing, telling stories, arguing about baseball. It's good pizza, Mason said quietly. It's the best, I agreed. The rolling door opened. A car pulled up outside. It was the grey Buick. Jeremiah Vance walked in. He was moving slower these days, using a cane, but his smile was as sharp as ever. He carried a small, wrapped package. Am I too late for the feast? Jeremiah asked. Just in time, I said, standing up to help him. Elias, grab a chair for the counselor. Jeremiah sat down. He looked at the table. He ran his hand over the surface. Bubinga, he murmured. The spirit wood. Arthur would have loved this. He always said this wood had a heartbeat. He looked at me. I have one last piece of business, Liam. The room went quiet. The crew sensed the shift in tone. Jeremiah placed the small package on the table. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. The estate is fully settled, Jeremiah said. Evelyn has moved to Florida. She's selling real estate now. I hear she's quite aggressive at it. Mason winced slightly but said nothing. But, Jeremiah continued, Arthur left one final instruction. He said, give this to Liam only when he builds the big table, not before. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? I asked. Open it. I untied the twine. My fingers were calloused and stained with walnut oil. I peeled back the paper. It was a small wooden box, simple, made of pine. I opened the lid. Inside lay a single rusted chisel. It was an old, cheap tool. The handle was cracked. The blade was pitted with age. It looked like garbage. But under the chisel was a letter. I picked up the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Arthur's. Read it, Jeremiah said softly, aloud. I cleared my throat. My hands were shaking. My dearest Liam, if you are reading this, you have built the table. That means you have a shop. That means you have a crew. That means you survived the storm. I know Evelyn told you that you weren't real family. I know that cut you deeper than any saw. I know you spent your life trying to earn your place, trying to be worthy of the name Vance. I have a confession to make. This chisel in the box? It was the first tool I ever bought. I was 18. I was an orphan, Liam, just like you. I never told you that. I told everyone I came from old money because that's what business required. But the truth is, I came from nothing.
I built the empire on sawdust and stubbornness. When I found you that day at the shelter, looking so angry and small, I didn't see a charity case. I saw myself.
I didn't adopt you to give you a father. I adopted you because I needed a son who understood the language of wood. Biological children, they are given to us by biology. It's a lottery. But you? I chose you. I looked at the whole world and said, that one. He is the one. So do not let anyone tell you that you are not real. Blood is just chemistry. Love is a craft. And you, my son, are my masterpiece. Now stop crying and finish your dinner. The wood is waiting. Love, Dad. I lowered the letter. I couldn't speak. The tears were hot on my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I looked at the rusted chisel. It wasn't garbage. It was the baton. He had started with nothing, and he had left it to me. So I could remember that nothing is where everything begins. The room was silent. Even the tough old carpenters were looking down at their plates, blinking rapidly. Mason was crying openly. He wiped his eyes with his dirty sleeve. He never told me that, Mason whispered, that he was an orphan. He was protecting the image, I said, my voice thick. He was playing the part, so we could be safe. I picked up the rusty chisel. I held it up. To Arthur, I said. The men raised their beer cans. To Arthur! They roared. The sound filled the factory. It bounced off the high steel beams. It resonated in the wood of the table. Jeremiah clinked his flask against my beer can. He would be proud, Liam, Jeremiah said. Not because you got the money, but because you kept the fire lit. The crew had gone home. The pizza boxes were cleared away. I was alone in the factory. I turned off the main lights, leaving only the security lamps glowing amber. I walked to the back, to the office. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. On the wall, mounted in a glass case, was the timekeeper. The first one. The one that had saved my life. Click, tock. Click, tock. It was still running. Perfect rhythm. I sat down at my desk, Arthur's old drafting desk, which I had bought back from the new owner of the mansion. I placed the rusty chisel on the desk, right next to the Patek Philippe watch. The beginning and the end. I opened the black sketchbook. I turned to a fresh, blank page. I picked up a pencil. I wasn't drawing furniture tonight. I wrote a single word at the top of the page. Family. And under it, I wrote the definition. Noun. A group of people bound not by blood, but by the shared friction of life. A structure built with patience, joined by loyalty, and finished with love. See also, the ones who stay. I closed the book. I stood up and walked out onto the factory floor one last time. The Bubinga table sat in the center, catching the moonlight from the skylights. It looked strong. It looked like it could hold the weight of the world. I walked to the door. I looked back at the shadows of the machines, the stacks of lumber, the sawdust on the floor. I wasn't the boy looking in through the window anymore. I wasn't the shadow at the feast. I turned the key in the lock. Click. The sound was final. It was the sound of a door closing on the past and a gate opening to the future. I walked out into the cool night air towards my truck. I had a busy day tomorrow. We had a table to ship. And I had a brother to teach how to use a saw. The wood remembers everything. It remembers the rain, the fire, and the hands that shaped it.